Okay, it started.
Thank you. I will call the February 14th, 2022 school board meeting to order. It is 7:01 p.m. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Braley? Here. Dr. Jessica Banger?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Ms. Mufeld? Here. Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Rowland?
Here.
Mr. Tillman?
Here.
Ella Archambault? Here. Kate Pluta? Here.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Before we begin, I just wanted to make a quick comment kind of on our agenda tonight. So we're moving into kind of the phase that the school board has talked about as far as having the first meeting of our month be more informative. We do have some things to vote on as well tonight. And then our second meeting on the 28th to be more action oriented. So there is a new spot on our website under the school board at the Walla School District spot for you to ask questions, for the public to ask questions. So as we talk about things tonight, there's a lot of good topics tonight for us to discuss. So as you have those questions and things you might want to learn more about as a member of the public, you can use that spot to send. There's a form to fill out. You can send that in and it will be directed to the correct department and they will respond to you with any questions you have. Then on the 28th, hopefully everyone's gotten the information they need, and then that's when you'd be welcome to kind of come forward before those votes and advocate for whatever position you want. So we're going to continue to refine this as we go, but our agenda tonight kind of getting us to that, which is what we've heard from the public and what we discussed as a board of where we want it to go. So I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts on that. We will move into public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Walla School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken in public comment regarding the non-agenda items this evening. I will start with folks in the room. If there's anyone who would like to come forward to discuss a non-agenda item, please state your name and address, and the mic is yours. And then if you're online, we will go to you next. So please raise your hand if there's something you'd like to share. Go ahead.
Hi there, thanks. Jen Kraft, 8818 Ravenswood Circle. My comments tonight are twofold. While I appreciate the service of the volunteer unelected medical public health advisory panel, I feel our board members now need to take back ownership and a say in the metrics of the reentry plan. In the words of the plan presented on August 23rd, 2021, at that meeting, the district established initial metrics to determine mitigation levels, including community infection rate, district infection rate. Since these were deemed initial metrics, I ask that they be updated to reflect our present reality. In the next steps portion of that presentation, which was slide 10, it stated, our focus is to return to normalcy as much as possible in the new school year, end quote. I offer that moving forward with using those metrics will not allow us to return to normalcy as stated in that focus statement. One way the board can take back ownership is by realigning the current published internal infection rate for level 2, which in my opinion is too low. It's 51 thousandths of a percent to 1%, which is considered moderate. Level 3, substantial, which really isn't, is currently at 50 to 99 cases per 100,000 people, which is just over the 1% to 5% internal infection rate as well. So I believe not only are those two examples confusing simply based on their names, moderate, substantial, they seem to offer action steps that in our current state would be an unnecessary overreaction when compared with the reality of what we now know is minimal risk to a youthful population from the COVID variants. The levels, in my opinion, need to be realigned to reflect an internal infection rate of 1 to 5%, which is in fact not a good basis to require masking. not a reason to require any further action and further disruption in the education of kids. So, second, I must express my disappointment in the news that was reported February 7th in the local media. Under the backdrop of the October, November, December colleague sub payments, which were reported at the January 24th, 2022 board meeting, which totaled approximately $40,000 for classroom teachers who were bending over backwards, prepping for classes, teaching classes, keeping themselves healthy, covering for fellow colleagues who had fallen ill when the Omicron variant was peaking, all happening during the time the district paid a lump sum payment of over $75,000, an employer contribution to WRS, and a 403B contribution for a former administrator who was not working.
You're over 3 minutes. We just wrap up. I appreciate it.
Where and how you spend taxpayer dollars reflect your values, and a 3-to-1 margin reflected your values. So I speak on behalf of teachers. I advocate for teachers to be treated better than that. Thank you.
Any other comments from those in the room tonight? Seeing none, do we have any folks online?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. We will move on to a recognition portion of our meeting. The board will recognize the Ian Standell Memorial Fund's generous donation of $7,250 to sponsor training and professional development for the staff at West High School through Your Choice to Live, Inc. I believe we have someone here that would like to speak a little bit on that. Please come forward. Thank you. Do we have anyone online? Ashley? Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, if we could let her speak, that would be great. And maybe put her up on the screen if we can.
Sure. Ashley, you should be able to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
And
Yep.
Okay. Are you able to see me or no?
You do not have your video going.
Okay. I don't have that option either. So, okay.
Wait,
Well,
I can actually give you the option. Sorry, one second.
oh, okay.
Okay, you should have that now. Oh, she has to rejoin. So 1 second.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. Hi, I'm Ashley from Your Choice. I just wanted to give everybody just a brief overview of who we are. We are a nonprofit organization that specializes in drug and alcohol prevention education. And we have been providing substance education for the past 10 years. We actually did a bedroom presentation a few years ago in the theater. So I don't know if any of you saw that, but what our goal is to educate students and teachers and parents about all of the drug trends that we see and also what we can do to prevent it. So with this donation, we were able to provide 85 of your teachers today with education on current drug trends with vaping and marijuana and alcohol. And then we also showed them ways that students can hide substances in school. So today they received that, and they also got handbooks that had 45 pages of information of all different substances. Also part of the grant, we have been doing a lot of webinars. With COVID, people can't get out and do things. So we have over 50 webinars on topics for anxiety, depression, suicide, substances, everything that kind of goes along with that. And we have access for your parents to be able to watch those whenever they can. And then lastly, we do have our wake up call bedroom for parents that we are working on setting a date for April. And that is similar to what we did with the teachers today, but we set up a mock bedroom and we show parents, some of the signs and ways that teens might hide vaping or other substances in their room. And then also proactive parenting. How do we parent for that? So with the donation, we are able to provide these resources to your school district. So that is all I have for you.
Thank you so much. Any board comments or questions?
I would like to, this is Eric Jessup Banger. Thank you so much for your work. Clearly an incredibly important issue, one that's only becoming more and more challenging. So your work on this is greatly appreciated, and the donation is a wonderful one. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll move on to consent agenda. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Please come forward.
Just briefly about Nick Hughes, principal, Walla Tulsa West. Just briefly about the training today. Ashley and her team were amazing with our staff, taking the time to walk through a backpack of items and things that can have multiple purposes. Talking about trends and information to me was really, really informative. Even as a parent of older children, very, very informative. So I look forward to scheduling the meeting and the presentation in April for our school community to see that mock bedroom, to learn a little bit more about the trends and things that are out there, because the things that they spoke about and the factors and situations that have impacted their lives impact us all. We all have a story or know somebody with a story, and it's important that as a community, we address it, don't hide it, and start to support each other with that. So I'm very grateful for the work today and the donations in relationship to Ian Standel. And with that, we'll have someone speak directly about that too.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Long. I'm the mother of 2 parents in the district. I'm wearing many hats while I'm here today. Professionally, I work on drug legislation, policy, and programming for the state. I also conduct the drug take back program. And so my shameless public service announcement tonight is that Drug Take Back Day is April 30th. I encourage you to get rid of your unused and expired medications, because unfortunately, that's how they get into the hands of people who sometimes end up misusing medications. I'm also here today as a board member for Your Choice to Live, so I have the pleasure of working with Ashley and her very talented team. I really want to thank Mr. Hughes and Dr. Means for making this possible, for allowing this to be done in the in-service today. And the next step is training parents. I believe that there's been no harder time to be a teenager. They are depressed, lonely, anxious, and many are turning to drugs and alcohol to numb the anxieties and the pressures that they're facing today. And parents don't necessarily know about vaping. I don't necessarily understand all the things that we can vape, but the dangers of fentanyl, which took the lives of 478 people in Milwaukee County alone in 2021. Like Ian Standel, that's 478 families in Milwaukee County who lost their lives to the deadly drug of fentanyl. My children are very lucky that I get to talk to them about this all the time at dinner. However, it's really important that we are sharing information about the Small Talks campaign that the Department of Health Services has put out to share with parents and teachers and staff alike how you can talk to your children about these resources. So finally, I want to thank the Standel family for creating a memorial for Ian that has made these trainings possible. I'm honored to be here tonight to share a statement with you written by Ian's mom, Amy. The Standels, through their generosity, have created this opportunity to share with others. I believe in the butterfly effect and hope that these trainings for teachers and parents will reach even just one person. So from Amy Standel, thank you to the Wauwatosa community for their unwavering support as we grieve the loss of Ian, who was the victim of a fentanyl overdose on July 24th, 2021. Drug overdoses, specifically fentanyl overdoses, have reached epidemic proportions. The Drug Enforcement Agency has started a national campaign and issued a warning that one pill can kill, and that is evident in Ian's death. As a memorial to Ian, we would like to raise awareness by providing parents, students, and staff with ongoing drug and alcohol education and training. We are asking the Wauwatosa School District for their support to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Thank you for being here with us tonight. All right. I think then we'll move on to our consent agenda items. Thank you for everyone for this. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Thank you. Any board questions or comments on the consent agenda? Ms. Fraley?
Just one under the first bullet point after it says it is recommended the board approve the following, the $240 per diem stipend, per diem per day, per week, per total.
Per day.
Per day, okay. That's what I assumed, but wanted to be clear.
Any other board questions or comments? Mr. Meyer, I apologize. You're not on the screen here in the room, so please speak up if you do. I can't see you visually at the moment.
Okay, thanks for the heads up.
Oh,
President.
there you are. All right, now you're on.
Okay. Should I talk more? No. Thanks.
I'm not sure if that's what brought you up or not. I'm not sure to tell you the truth. All right, seeing no board questions or comments, any community comment on the consent agenda? Let's go to those in the room first. Seeing none, is there anyone online?
We have one raised hand. BJ Emmerich, you're allowed to talk.
Go ahead. To items on the consent agenda, please.
Yep, on your consent.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is BJ Armantz. I am a member of the Commission for Citizens with Disabilities, and I'm joining this Zoom for the first time. I appreciate that it's available, but I need the captions turned on, please.
I believe I turned them on.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. I would also ask that in the future, live captions be turned on for every meeting, regardless if someone requests it or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online to speak concerning the consent agenda?
No other hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes,
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Tillman.
Yes. Next, we'll move to our business services action item. Ms. Fraley.
It is recommended that the school board approve the purchase of a third van, and I so move. Second.
Thank you. Dr. Means, are you speaking to this or?
Yes. As you can see, the district's plan or recommendation proposal is to purchase a third van for the use of our students who are in the Next Steps in Bridges program. We feel that there is a need for those students. Sometimes 2 vans isn't sufficient. And there's also timing issues, and it would create greater flexibility for us to utilize the funds to help with this program, with these 2 programs. Just having the greater flexibility of a third van would be advantageous for us. So hence the proposal.
Thank you. Any board questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, any community comment on this item? We'll start with those in the room. Seeing none, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
yes,
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Tillman.
Yes. We'll move on to buildings and grounds action item. Dr. Joseph Banger.
It is recommended that the school board approve the contract with Blue Edge Energy and authorize the Director of Building and Grounds to one, purchase gas through the company selected by Blue Edge Energy, and two, elect timing and quantiles of gas purchases with advice from the contractor and approval of the Chief Financial Officer, and I so move.
Second.
Thank you.
How are you? I'm Greg Truminski, Buildings and Grounds Director for the district. And I just thought I'd give you a kind of a little background on this. So the Walla Tulsa School District has been purchasing natural gas directly on the open market for several years. We have current agreements with a consulting firm, broker, if you will, with Blue Edge Energy for consulting services. And our current natural gas provider is Wood River Energy. Just large commercial buyers of natural gas over the last several years have had the ability to purchase directly on the wholesale market, and as opposed to just going through the local utility company now. Utility companies kind of charge their actual cost for natural gas plus a markup, which typically is often higher than prices available on the commodities market. So sometimes results in potential wide fluctuation of price and generally a higher cost. So we engage the services of a company of Blue Edge Energy, and this has resulted in cost savings, and they pretty much perform three important functions for us. They select a natural gas provider for us through an RFP process, so it's competitively bid. And then they monitor and work with us on our historic usage of gas so that we can project future needs of natural gas going forward. And then they watch the commodities market to predict potential gas price changes. When there's a predicted upswing, Blue Edge Energy will coordinate the purchasing of future gas at less than expected future prices by way of, they will make a recommendation at times that it may be a good time to hedge or lock in a percentage of our predicted natural gas usage for, could be the following month or the month after, what have you, to lock in those prices on that amount. Typically, the process kind of goes that the Blue Edge Energy consults with myself, the Buildings and Grounds Director in the past, and to determine the amount of natural gas to purchase for every month, and then make those decisions on whether or not to lock in at those potentially lesser rates. From a fiscal note standpoint, the Blue Edge Energy per their agreement is paid 0.025 per therm. That's what they get of therms of gas that go through our meters. That's been the same since the start of our agreement with them. The exact amount, obviously unpredictable, because as much as we can try and predict weather and usage of natural gas, it's impossible. So it can have variations. The average cost, just for history purposes here, the average cost from March of 2017 to December of 2021, essentially about 5 years, has been about $2,005 per month to Blue Edge Energy. And the utility cost savings over that period of time was a net savings of $208,897, which is after our fees and stuff that we paid to them. So that's just kind of the background of the history of it and the savings that we have had in this district. And so therefore we're moving to just approve the agreement with Blue Edge Energy and authorize the Director of Buildings and Grounds to purchase gas through the company selected through the RFP process, the company selected by Blue Edge Energy, and elect the timing and the quantities of gas purchases going forward with the advice from them, as well as the approval of the Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. Any board comments or questions on the side?
Yes, may I speak, Mr. Doman?
Mr. Allen raised his hand, then I'll go to you, Mr. Meyer.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. The main question, I guess, is does Blue Edge Energy have competitors to be, doing an RFP for the consultant that's going to be doing the RFP?
I believe that there are probably other competitors out there that do this sort of thing. I am not aware of what they would be at this time. The agreements that were in place before my time here, of course, but it's certainly something that we can look into going forward, most definitely.
Okay.
Okay. So you finish. It's certainly something that I think, especially when the district does fill the vacancy of the chief financial officer, that we would want that person involved in that process as well.
Is there a timing? Are we kind of in a pinch where we need to have something and then kind of commit to doing an RFP for this RFP in the future? Or could we begin that RFP process now? How much flexibility and timing do we have for this?
The current agreement that we have with Wood River Energy is through October 31st of 2022. However, the process for going out to RFP would be over the next month or so that Blue Edge Energy would do to secure something to go beyond that. So, yes, pinch.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess, right, my preference would be, and I know we're heading in that direction. It takes a little bit of time to steer a battleship in a different direction, but getting into that different direction, I guess I'm okay with approving this for, a time, but then creating some kind of policy or affirming our policy that says that after a certain amount of time, and all of our vendors should be going to RFP, even if we've, worked for a long time. I know Milwaukee County, I think, has an ordinance where it's every 7 years. That might just be at least a starting point to have something in place to say, all right, we have to go to RFP. It's maybe it varies by vendor to vendor too. So, thank you.
Mr. Meyer.
Thanks. I support this. And that said, just a couple of comments. Obviously, if anybody could predict commodities prices, energy commodities prices, they'd be rich. So even when this company locks in the future at a lower price, there is risk involved in that. And you call that a hedge buy. There's another concept is hedge investment, which balances against the risk of future price changes in the wrong direction than anticipated. But that gets into very complicated financial principles, and no doubt Mr. Phillips could talk a lot about them. But I think my bottom line here is that we can get lower prices and accept the risk that, they could go up because we maintain our fund balance. And that allows us to, that's our sort of our risk mitigation of being a victim of unexpected high prices by doing something like this. So my bottom line is to emphasize that the fund balance allows us to make economical business decisions because we can accept some risk without putting our financial operation in jeopardy. So thank you.
Any other board questions or comments?
Mr. Dolman, just to emphasize Mr. Rollins' statement, Mr. Dixon, who's our business office consultant, is continuing to gather all contracts in the district, and he's creating a spreadsheet to figure out what's the duration of contracts, when do we need to put them out for RFP. So we're, as you referenced the battleship, we're starting to put a process in place so these don't sneak up on us anymore. And we're pretty close to having that spreadsheet completed. One of the, I'm learning financial language now, but one of the items that I think we've learned about our purchasing and financial structure is that we have design deficiencies in terms of how we procure contracts. And what that means is that there isn't a solidified process where if a department signs a contract that is automatically forwarded to the business office. So there have been contracts signed our current design doesn't direct those contracts to the business office. You would assume that in our design, all contracts signed by the Walla Tulsa School District rest in the business office. That's not the current procedure. So we're working toward it, and I'm confident by the end of the school year we'll be there.
Thank you, Dr. Means. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any community comment on the natural gas contract? Start with those in the room. Seeing none, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
Yes. Next is superintendent action item, action to approve the 2022 Hart Park facilities. Ms. Mufeld.
Yes, thank you. It is recommended that the school board formally approve the 2022 Hart Park Facilities Rental Agreement with the City of Wauwatosa in the amount of $45,577.50. And I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland.
This item was tabled at our last board meeting. The board asked that administration go back and confirm that this is the dollar amount for the 2022 school year. This is the dollar amount. There are primarily 2 seasons of the 3 WIAA seasons that student athletes participate in that we use Hart Park for athletics. In the spring, we utilize the fields for girls and boys track and field, and also for boys tennis. In the fall, we utilize, it's really interesting. In the fall, we use Hart Park for girls tennis, football, and at times, boys and girls cross country, they will use the track. And so those are primarily the sports that they use the facilities for at Hart Park. Mr. Hughes was here earlier. I think the vision for Mr. Hughes and his leadership at Tulsa East High School is that eventually he would like to have graduation at Hart Park. Unfortunately, the date was taken for 2022. But I think he's already working on 2023. So I think that will be another addition moving forward. But in terms of the 2022 invoice, back to Mr. Rollins' comment earlier, in the past, we received an invoice and that invoice was paid. That invoice typically exceeded the $20,000 mark. So we're trying to adhere to your board policy, hence bringing it to you this evening. The city has been very cooperative with us in regards to process and procedures we need to put in place to ensure that it's one invoice and it covers the entire year. So I think we answered the questions that you asked us to answer from the last time. This is, again, the reason why we're bringing it forward to you this evening.
Board questions or comments?
May I comment?
Go ahead, Mr. Meyer.
So at least in spirit, there were comments at the last board meeting somehow, at least in my mind, linking the use of our buildings for voting and that we were not charging a fee for that. Somehow in spirit, not legally, but in spirit, linking it to this to say, well, gee, we let our rooms be used for free for voting. Can you show us a little help here on the Hart Park agreement? And since that time, I've had occasion to find out what we charge citizens for use of those meeting rooms, and I believe it's $30 an hour. I thought 20, but somebody told me 30. So you'd have to confirm that exactly. But we do charge for use of those rooms to our citizens. And if those rooms are typically not utilized on an evening, then it's no, they were open anyway, why charge something? But if we find out going forward that those rooms are utilized on weekday evenings, such that, basically paying customers were displaced by the city, then in the future, I would ask that we maintain an awareness of that in case circumstances change in the future. That I like the idea of use of our rooms for voting for free, but if we forego revenue or have to incur expenses, then I would in the future expect that somehow be considered when we negotiate this Hart Park agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any other board questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, any community comment on this from folks in the room?
Hi, Deb Falk, Pallet 7435 West Wells Street. I did go back and review the board meeting when this was discussed. And yes, there was going to be discussion with the city regarding the contract and the term of the contract, but also I know that it was discussed, there was going to be some conversation with the city. Did that happen in terms of trying to negotiate potentially decreasing this $45,000 so that taxpayers aren't, money's coming out of the school to go to the, so I just wanted to make sure that that piece of the board discussion from the last meeting, did that happen? I'm hoping somebody can ask, and if so, who at the city said, no, it has to stay this way. Thank you.
Any other public comments from those in the room? Seeing none, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Any other board comments or questions? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes. Up next, we'll have a human resources report on file bound.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer Foch, Director of Human Resources for the district, and I'm here to present the renewal for FileBound. FileBound is the system that currently houses our onboarding and personnel files. We have an agreement with the Crichton Group who provides the platform to us, and that expires on May 4th, 2022. And given that it meets the threshold of policy 6320, we needed to look at some different options and see what best fit the district moving forward. In short, I investigated 3 options: continuing with FileBound, a company called Silk Road, which unfortunately only does onboarding, so couldn't meet the personnel file requirements, and then Frontline Central, which is another major player in the land of education in terms of personnel files and onboarding. All in all, the most fiscally responsible option that I found was the continuing what we have, which would also be a benefit to our department in terms of the soft cost of implementation of a new system. Would put a strain on the resources of our department as well. So we would like to continue. We're working with the group to create some more efficiencies in the process. We found a duplication of files, which is forcing our document count up. So we're working on a system to mitigate that. And so hopefully we won't reach the next threshold, but even that next threshold wouldn't be terribly cost prohibitive either. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So I'll say this is one of those items where we're discussing tonight and we'll vote on the 28th. So certainly a good opportunity here to ask questions you have, but also I'm sure Ms. Foch will answer questions over the next couple of weeks from us or folks from the public have questions as well. Ms. Fraley.
Not a question, but just a comment. I'm really glad you brought up soft cost, because anytime we switch a system, whether it was moving to STAR for, student assessment, whatever, there's a real cost to what it takes to retrain and get folks comfortable and confident and efficient. So thank you for raising that as well, because while I appreciate an RFP process and looking at numbers, I think sometimes we often forget about the number and the cost of changing something versus staying with what we know, if it's high quality.
It does work for us right now, and we have some other ideas as to save some costs and implement some new things down the road. So yeah, with other systems.
So long as we're thinking about we're not settling and that it is doing what we need and that sort of thing.
It's doing exactly what we need it to do.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Freeland. Any other board questions for Ms. Foch? Okay. Thank you. We'll see you back in 2 weeks. Up next, teaching and learning report, curriculum instruction and assessment audit. To be presented.
Yes. I would ask WSD if we can. I don't know what the best model is to control the presentation.
Dr. Means, I could move forward in the presentation if you need me to, if you emailed it to the WSD media account.
Jeremy, let me know if you have it.
No problem. It'll just take a moment.
Sure. As we're finding the presentation, I would like to start by saying that we actually had an audit done of our curriculum instruction and assessment department conducted between the months of November and January. Dr. Dana Minogue, former assistant superintendent for teaching and learning in the Elmbrook School District and current superintendent in Middleton Cross Plains, conducted the audit. We felt that she was the best suited person to do it for a number of different reasons. One, she's a well-respected leader in curriculum instruction and assessment across the state. But two, her knowledge of our school district, having worked in a neighboring district for so many years, was really important to us. So she was familiar with Walla, Tulsa, and I thought that was really important. She interviewed all of our principals and also all of our members of our teaching and learning team to get a sense of what do they see as challenges and opportunities with our curriculum instruction and assessment team. And maybe what I should do is, should I share it again, maybe?
No, I got it. It'll be there in 1 second.
Okay.
So.
I wasn't sure if I could continue to stretch. I was going to. What I would say is a couple of things to preview here. I want to start by saying we have amazing things happening and really good things happening in classrooms across our schools every day. And so often with these types of presentations, we tend to gravitate to what isn't happening and where's our deficiencies. And that's easy to do. I don't want to dwell on what we don't have right now. I think it's really important to recognize that we have some amazing educators who are doing some really good work with students. Candidly, when you consider the current state of our curriculum instruction and assessment infrastructure, the results we're receiving and getting from our teachers and based on what we don't have in place is even more remarkable. The fact that we don't have an infrastructure and certain structures in place. We have really hardworking teachers who are really going above and beyond and doing some really amazing work. Jeremy, I'm ready for the next slide. So what we don't want to do tonight is admire the problem. And I think so often we admire the problem with these types of audits. If individuals are interested in receiving and reading Dr. Minogue's report, she did a slide presentation and also a written report. Those materials are available to you. What we want to focus on, what I want to focus on this evening is to talk about what our action plan will be moving forward and what the community and the board can hold me responsible for as we move forward. The findings are revealing yet predictable. Our infrastructure is lacking the following things. We don't have a standards aligned curriculum for all subject areas. What that means is that there are academic standards that either the state or national organizations have developed for all academic areas. And our school district, we're responsible for identifying those standards and having teachers teach to those standards. I want to be very clear, what we typically do in the Walla Tulsa School District, and this isn't unusual in a lot of school districts. We buy materials, we buy resources that are identified as standards-based. And by virtue of buying those materials, we'll say that we are a standards-based school system. But there's a difference between using materials that are standards-based and literally having standards that you identify as a teacher to say, we're going to meet these standards throughout the school year. We don't have that type of curriculum in place right now. Number two, we don't have a standard aligned district common assessment system. What I mean by that is there should be common assessments that we're able to utilize because we're using the same materials from one elementary school to the next, that are common assessments to measure if students are understanding the materials that are presented to them. We do not have that in place. Now, someone will say, well, wait a minute, my student takes the STAR assessment. The STAR assessment is a progress monitoring tool to see if there's intellectual growth happening across the school year. That is not measuring if students are growing and learning the standards that should be taught throughout the school year. So those are two very different things. Three, we do not have a 7-year curriculum cycle. That's significant. That's significant. We should have a 7-year cycle. Ideally, that would be a shorter duration of time, but financially 7 years is about what most school districts have to look at. But there should be a 7-year cycle where we make a commitment to our teachers and our students and our community that every 7 years we're going to review science or social studies or English language arts or math or physical education, you name the subject, to make sure that those materials are updated and refreshed and new. Right now, it's episodic. It depends on in the past, it depended on who was able to get to certain leaders at Fisher to say, I think it's time for us to have materials. There's no clearly defined instructional expectations. Teachers don't know and principals don't know what are we striving for in terms of instructional expectations. Our current educator effectiveness tool that we're obligated to implement, our evaluation tool, is not a developmental tool to help teachers become better. It's more of a checklist, and it feels very rote. One of the recommendations I will make is that educator effectiveness or evaluation of teachers should come out of human resources as a department. It should be part of our curriculum instruction and assessment department because it should be about growth and development and giving people time to become better. And then finally, We don't have a clearly defined professional learning plan for the district. Today was a professional learning day across the district, and we put a lot of pressure on teacher leaders at each building and principals to come up with ideas and professional learning that they could implement. I want to thank Ms. Ebert and Dr. Marble for their assistance, but those are only two people. And we have a lot of our coaches who stepped in today, and they stretched themselves and they helped with professional learning. But again, it was episodic. It was not a vision that we were trying to address. From a board perspective, because I know as board members, you always say, so what's in it for us? What are you trying to get us to realize? In the future, if we're not referencing policy 2210 and 2623, 2210 is just curriculum development. 2623 is around student assessment and how are we assessing student work. If we're not focusing on those two policies, we're failing you from a governance standpoint, and we're failing students. Jeremy? The next slide I think is really important. These are comparables. And when I was transitioning into the district, I asked the question. So I didn't even ask for the numbers yet. I just asked the question. So who do we consider to be, who are our comparables? Who do we consider to be our comparables? After a lot of discussion, we've landed at least to start with these four districts. We may add more as we move on. You may want to add more on as a board, but Elmbrook, I think, is one of those, something that I don't think any of us would debate is a comparable. Menominee Falls, Hamilton, and New Berlin. And when you compare how we have performed over the last few years, and I wanted to go back a few years and not focus on how we're coming out of our COVID-19 pandemic space, but even looking at years before the pandemic, I think there was something that was happening. And when I talk to community members and have listening sessions, people will reference that anecdotally, they were sensing some of this. Candidly, as I went through the selection process, you referenced this. You didn't have this table, but you referenced it. You knew it was there. Just as a side note, there were no report cards for the 2019-2020 school year. That's why that year is blank. Jeremy, thank you. So I think this quote is really important, and I want to thank Dr. Marble for this quote. A school that does not have these two elements, standards and alignment, cannot be an equitable and excellent school. First, the school must have a school-wide curriculum schema, standards, in all subjects and grades. Second, in an equitable and excellent school, all teachers must have a strong sense of the whole schema and a strong sense of their specific role in that schema. When you look at this quote, we talk a lot about equity in Walla, Tulsa. Where I would want to center us as a community is that if we're not teaching to standards, if we're not structured and ensuring that there's a framework for how we're going to do our work and curriculum instruction and assessment, then we're unable to be an equitable school system. And so that's really important. Jeremy? So often people have asked, so Damon, what's your vision for Walla, Tulsa? My vision is very clear. I want to establish us as a lighthouse district. And a lighthouse district is educational talk for, we want to be one of those school districts that people look to in the state or across the country in eradicating inequity and disproportionality, while eventually exceeding proficiency for all. So in this vision, there's a duality that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to close achievement gaps to a point where they're gone. There's no such thing as achievement gaps. But at the same time, we're going to hold all of our students to a high standard for proficiency. And that standard starts at proficiency. It's no lower than proficiency. It can't be any lower than proficiency. That proficiency will be defined for some students differently based on their ability. But generally speaking, we know where those benchmarks are. Jeremy? So there's a lot of text in this one, and we'll drill down in the next few slides. But there's a 4-point plan that we would like to focus on to really fix where we need to be with curriculum, instruction, and assessment. First, we have to reorganize the department. And it has to be reorganized to better support teachers and create greater consistency. Right now, we're asking teachers to develop their own curriculum. Right now, we're asking teachers to develop their own assessments. Right now, we're asking teachers to be mini curriculum directors. And so in a few minutes, I'll go into detail on what that reorganization looks like. Number 2, we have to adhere to District Policy 2210. We have to design a 7-year curriculum cycle, not only for you as a board, so you know what's coming forward, but for the next chief financial officer. That person has to have the ability to project and to know when are we going to have large financial requests coming to our district. It's a fiduciary responsibility along with curriculum. We also have to support curriculum renewal and design. There's pockets of our curriculum throughout the district that haven't been redesigned in years, almost for a decade. That's unacceptable to have a curricular area not touched in over 10 years. Number 3, we have to adhere to policy 2610, and that's 2610, excuse me, and that's around student assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit about continuous improvement and what assessments look like. And then finally, number 4, we have to support data literacy. I think we've tried and we've talked a lot about data literacy in the district, but one thing that we haven't done and supported our leaders in data literacy is the curricular leaders have never identified what are the key performing indicators that we want all students to achieve. Setting that marker in the district to say, this is where we want to have our students reach in terms of their performance and to move forward in that area. So, Jeremy, if you can go to the next slide. So reorganize the department. We have to reorganize the department to better support teachers and create greater consistency. Right now, what we would like to do is to empower our teacher leaders. And I've heard a lot about how teachers feel like Fisher tells them what to do and it's more top down. I think the reason why it feels that way is because we don't have teacher leaders to help shepherd and guide the development of curriculum. I think some of you know, but I worked here 20 years ago, and there was a model here 20 years ago where there were teacher leaders who were responsible for leading certain curricular areas. I'll throw out a name that some of you veterans may recognize, but there was a woman by the name of Robin Gleason who was responsible for the development of our reading program here in the district. And her sole job was to develop lessons and to refine the curriculum and to support teachers so they didn't have to become mini curricular directors at their schools, but they could simply take those lessons if they chose to and teach. We also have to design the department to support teachers and student learning. And what I mean by that is that right now we don't have enough coaches to help teachers to figure out, so if we have identified what good instruction looks like, how do I get there? How can I have someone who's going to coach me to get there? Right now we use either the carrot or the stick. And the carrot is you are someone that the principal has identified as a good performer. You've been told that you're a good performer. The end. And if you're not a good performer, we have a model where we put you on a plan of improvement. There's no in between. And we need to create more coaching opportunities for our teachers to understand what does good instruction look like. If we want to be a good learning institution and model that for students, we have to first start with the adults in the organization. Jeremy? The second is to refocus on curriculum development. we must develop that 7-year curricular cycle. Part of that 7-year curricular cycle isn't always just about purchasing the materials. That's the exciting part. There's no doubt about it. But at the board level, it's also where you get your annual monitoring report. It's where we actually dig into implementation science. It's not just because all the new materials have come in, we're done. It's about someone coming back to you 18 months later to say, how are things going? What's working well? What's not going well? And I've always tried to encourage our curricular leaders and be honest with the board. Tell the board, well, we thought 18 months ago this was going to be a good piece of material to purchase. Maybe it's not as strong as we thought it was going to be, or we need to purchase another material at this point now. Those are the conversations that need to happen. Within policy 2210, there is a monitoring component to the implementation of curriculum that's adopted. I don't think we've adhered to that provision of the policy tightly. So that's refocus on curriculum development. Jeremy? We need a commitment to continuous improvement. We're very episodic as a system right now. One thing that I would like to do with our district reorganization, district office reorganization, is to create a district director of continuous improvement, someone whose sole responsibility is to ensure that school improvement plan goals are being met, that student learning outcomes are being met, and that they're there to support our teachers and our principals in understanding what does continuous improvement really truly look like. It's a process. It's creating a system and a structure where, and I've shared this with our principals, that sometimes it's okay to fail. And I think we're so, again, episodic as a school system that some principals have said, you've increased the expectations, Dr. Means. I'm not quite sure if I want to do this because is this a safe place for us to learn and grow? And so a continuous improvement environment isn't always about just setting high expectations and meet them or else. It's also about coaching people and supporting them and letting them know that it's okay to set those goals, learn from what you didn't reach, and get better moving forward. I think it's very important, that last bullet point that I want to point out to, especially to parents. There's a difference between our internal common assessments and progress monitoring assessment, like the previous tool that we used called MAP, or what we're currently using, which is STAR. Again, STAR is a tool that will help a teacher determine if a student is intellectually growing from the fall to the winter, from the winter to the spring. A common assessment based on the curriculum will tell you, are they learning what they need to learn for 4th grade? They being the student. Is the student truly learning? Are they gaining the information based on the standards that they should learn in social studies in middle school? Is that really happening? Those conversations, unfortunately, are not happening in our school district right now because we're void of internal common assessments. Jeremy? And then data literacy. Data literacy is a very unique skill. And I think we've been working at it for a long time. One thing that I think we have failed prior leaders of our data literacy work around as a district is that we haven't set key performance indicators for where we want all students to achieve. Let me give you a prime example, and I've shared this with our principals last week at our A-team meeting, our administrative team meeting. There is clear research that shows that if a student completes Algebra 2 with a C grade or higher by the end of their 10th grade year, that the ACT and other researchers will say that they guarantee that that student will persist through their 2nd year in college. That's a fact. That's research supported. A lot of school districts have moved to a place to say, then that's where we want our students to be. That's a goal, that we want our students to, and I'm not suggesting that that's a goal for us tonight. What I'm suggesting to you is that that's a marker that some school districts have said, that's a key performance indicator based on the research. So let's set our goals here and see where we land. If our goal is 100% and we get to 50%, okay. But at least we can now measure where we're going and where we need to improve. To have data for data's sake and not to have performance indicators doesn't really do you any good. And so I think that's been one of our gaps as an organization. The second is we have to align assessments to monitor if students are meeting the indicators. The key is number 3, and I've heard this a lot from teachers, and we have to have interventions in place to help students, both in-person interventions and also materials, resources, to help kids when we realize they're not meeting those indicators. So it's not enough to say, well, we have the indicators and X amount of % of our kids are not meeting them. Now what do we do? And I think that's a fear that a lot of our staff have. So what are we going to do to support these young people if they're not meeting those indicators? And so I think having those interventions in place will be helpful. And then finally, we have to reimage the capacity of data warehousing. You've heard Mr. Price talk about data warehousing and how we can make that something that is reasonable and something that all staff members can really get their arms wrapped around. Jeremy? So I'll go quickly here for the last few slides. So what's in it for students if we do this work? We'll create a greater foundation for determining student support. Right now, we don't know where student support should be. It's hit or miss. And we would have a better system to figure out where can we and where should we support students. There will be an assurance that students are exposed to up-to-date resources. Right now, teachers are updating resources on their own. They're pulling resources together as a team or a school to make sure that their resources are tight for their individual school. There will be greater understanding of student progress based on district goals, not just, I like to call the Wisconsin Ford exam an autopsy. It's after everything is done. If we can create common assessments, we'll know where students are going during the school year. That's really important. And we'll make sure that students are receiving a similar instructional rigor across each and every school and each and every classroom. We'll also increase student engagement. Right now, we have a lot of young people who are not engaged in their own learning. If we can align our instruction to the standards, they'll be more engaged in their own learning. Jeremy? What's in it for our staff and our teachers? There will be greater support in lesson and common assessment development. Right now, all that work is resting on the shoulders of teachers. There will be assurance that teachers and staff have access to professional learning in the district, that they don't have to go outside the district. And that there's a foundational curricular foundation and framework from which to utilize professional expertise. Right now, if a teacher's out on leave, then that new substitute teacher has to work around and scurry around and figure out where's the next lesson plan, because there's nothing in place. Furthermore, there's legislation in the legislature right now that will demand that we show what our curriculum looks like. We don't have any infrastructure or platform that says this is what our curriculum should be. Right now, there's no framework to say this is where your lessons can be found, this is how you can construct your lessons. And I want to be very clear. Right now, due to the lack of infrastructure, there's a lot of autonomy that people have been able to enjoy. We're not suggesting that autonomy goes away. We're simply saying that the framework needs to be put in place. If teachers want to continue to enjoy that autonomy, that's their decision. But there are, and you can go out and ask, there are first-year teachers who are They're walking a tightrope without a net. They have no support because we, as the district, has done a very poor job in not providing that framework. Jeremy? So what's in it for parents and community members? There will be equitable access to district resources and assistance. Right now, without the infrastructure, if you have capital, if you know how to navigate the school system, you know how to get the resources. I have said this before to a few other community groups. It feels like some of our community groups feel like they have to advocate because they have realized that you have to advocate a certain way to get those resources and get that assistance. If we work to create a framework that is more equitable and more visible, then everyone has access to resources and assistance. There will be clarity around the district's expectations for academic progress. So no longer do we have to wring our hands about where our scores are compared to our competitors. We'll know where we want to go. And then there's greater progress monitoring for success. We'll know what we're expected to do. In essence, that last bullet point is there's greater accountability. Jeremy? But there was a bonus finding that Dr. Minogue didn't find. And that bonus finding is something that we've been discussing. And when I say we, Ms. Ebert and Dr. Marble and I have been discussing with principals the entire year. And that is built principals are the key. There's a lot of research, and you'll see the research is underneath and is cited underneath, but in bold, the bold areas are areas in which principals have to demonstrate direct leadership. They have to provide observational feedback to teachers on their instruction. They have to be a constant presence in classrooms. They have to have expertise in the art and science of instruction. They have to set high expectations for all students and articulate instructional goals to all stakeholders, not just the faculty, but to the students and their staff, their parent base as well. The areas that are not in bold, those are indirect things that are happening through relationships. So they're engaging with teachers around instructional decisions. They're inspiring teachers to innovate instructionally. They're building trust. They protect instructional time. That's a really important one. And what I mean by protect instructional time, you want to make sure that instruction is happening every day, that we're not wasting that time and that time is slipping away. You want to create strong working conditions for high quality instruction. In other words, we don't want discipline to get in the way of instruction. We want to promote teacher collaboration, and we want to make sure that resources are getting to every classroom. Jeremy? So there's just a quote here that we used at the beginning of the school year about the principalship. School principals make a significant difference in the social, emotional, and academic outcomes rendered by students in their schools. As referenced, Linda Darling Hammond is noted as stating, school leadership strongly affects student learning. Principals are central to the task of building schools that promote powerful teaching and learning for all students. So I'll leave you with this in terms of what every school deserves in the Walla Tulsa School District. Jeremy, last slide. We need learning-focused leaders, and that's just not principals. That's teacher leaders, that's curricular directors, that's everyone who will devote an abundant amount of time to supporting their colleagues in the efforts to strengthening teaching and learning in and across classrooms. Foremost, they are aggressive in identifying and removing barriers that prevent colleagues from doing their work well. They provide intellectual stimulation and make certain that teachers have high quality stream of job embedded opportunities to expand, enhance, and refine their repertoires of instructional skills. So I want to thank you for listening to the presentation. Again, we have more of a, what I would consider to be an action plan to Dr. Minogue's audit. I felt that it was good to have a foundation for her to identify where are the gaps, but I didn't want to waste anyone's time, your time as a board, the community's time, but most importantly, the students' time, for us to sit back and admire what we already know is a challenge. We wanted to share with you what our action plan is for you to critique that and to give feedback and direction.
Thank you, Dr. Means. I'll start with any board questions or comments for Dr. Means in the presentation.
I'll do one quick one. You know, we were looking at the curricular audit schedule of 7 years. How often, or at the curricular level, how often should we have one of these audits? And should that be built into the review as well? And then secondly, will someone also be, you know, assisting us with the implementation of, you know, what was found is one thing, that's a different skill, but when you actually go and put it into place, and that's a lot of moving parts, like, will there be some outside help with that? So just a two-part question. Yeah.
It's a great questions. I think in terms of renewing that audit, I think a 7-year review of the department would be prudent. You know, we talked about the 7-year curricular cycle. The same could hold true in terms of our deferred maintenance schedule. You know, so this happens in all aspects of the organization. So I would say every 7 years.
Okay.
We're currently searching for a new chief academic officer. That's going to be quite the hire. Right. And so we're looking for someone who has these abilities to lead this type of work. Dr. Minogue referenced that there's a lot of systems missing, and a lot of consistency missing in the organization. And what I was able to share with her, because again, I was here years ago, and those of you who've been here will say, wait a minute, we used to have these systems. I can attest to the fact we had these, all the things that she's identifying what we don't have. If you talk to veterans of this organization, they will say, well, we had that in Walla Tulsa. Walla Tulsa was a leader in these areas. And that's why, again, I want to start where I began. We have amazing teachers, because despite the voids and the gaps, we have teachers who are really, they're independently filling those voids that the district hasn't fulfilled.
Would it make sense for her to come back to make sure nothing falls through the cracks midstream? Like, I don't know what the total implementation, you know, looks like, if that is a 7-year process to implement all these, and that does make sense for it not to happen until the end of the process. But like, is there a gut check or a midway check, or, you know, another way that we could just get another set of eyes to come in externally and take a look, like pace and progress? Like, does that make sense, or is there another mechanism for that? Just to, you know, it's a lot of moving parts, right? I'd hate to see stuff wind up on the ground, if you will, you know?
I think so I think as the board knows, the community may or may not know, but we're hiring for a total of at least 6 new positions at the district office level. A chief academic officer, a chief financial officer, a chief of pupil and family supports, a chief of talent, a director of diversity and inclusion, and a director of special education. What I'm taking down and putting in my notes here is that it kind of speaks to implementation science in a way. It's not enough just to hire people.
Right.
What system are we going to create so they are successful when they're in their positions? It's not enough to kind of give them the keys and say, good luck, build the system, but what support systems are we gonna, and I think that support system has to go beyond the people in this room right now. So that's something that I don't have a full answer, but I will get back to you. I think that's something I will continue to ponder.
Cool. I love the rubric that was in there, right, around the organizational change. That was
right.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
So may I comment?
Go ahead, Mr. Meyer.
President. Dr. Means, you referenced back to Robin Gleason, and I recall that name, and as you do. I also, and Dr. Means, as you've shared with me, you respect another name, Beth Ehrenberger. She was here 7 years ago, leading us. We had all these things back then, and obviously something happened that the things she did went by the wayside after she left. And I want to commend Dr. Means. As soon as he came in the door informally, he saw these needs. And he informally has said so. And this plan he has been in the works for a long time. I haven't known it specifically, but I know he's obviously a thinking high-powered person. So I'm sure the mind has always been working on it. And I commend you, Dr. Means, for formalizing the process to bring it to us like this. So we have a very specific blueprint of where we need to get back to. Thanks.
Any other board comments or questions, Ms. Mufo?
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and all of the work that was done. To me, it's the how that matters and the continuity. So continuity between levels, elementary, middle, high school, the partnerships with higher ed, partnerships with the business world, and job opportunities for students post our K-12 system, advancement. So to me, the how really matters, and how fast we can implement for the optimal student experience. That's really what we're looking here. I mean, to me, that's where we only have a certain amount of time to interact with every student and to make it as meaningful as possible.
Any other board questions, comments? Dr. Chesapeake?
Tonight seems important. And I know we've spoken about this for quite a while. I think this, coupled with the next presentation about resources that we can utilize to invest in some of these items in the short term and plans for the longer term. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about how all the different pieces fit together, the different systems that are in place and that are projected to be in place. I'm excited about Mr. Phillips. I know you've talked quite a bit kind of informally in the past about the importance of leveraging teacher talent, and how do we both provide all the supports necessary while also leveraging their professionalism, their talent. This idea of like teacher autonomy, like we want them to be professionals and we want them to be fully supported and coherent across the district and across schools. This will be an interesting thing to figure out how to balance and how to do that with them. I think there is a lot of different pieces here that I think will be really powerful in helping raise standards and raise expectations and providing all the supports. Your point to one of your points you made is we want to be excellent for every kid. And we want to raise standards for every single kid. And so the ideas of that you're kind of presenting and laying out here of how do we be a lighthouse district, I think that's beautiful terminology. How do we do this? How do we do this with the community? And how do we do this across 3 different kind of elementary, middle school, high school that are in different places and have different challenges? And in some ways in our community, our elementary schools feel really different than our middle schools and high schools because they're neighborhood based. So, so there's some interesting opportunities and challenges here. But I'm excited about this. I'm excited about the built-in systems of accountability, the kind of ongoing systems of assessment, and your point about kind of those principles as leaders really resonates with me on a lot of levels. I was lucky enough to teach some courses on leadership and organizational change to folks in these roles several years ago. And when they are excited and feel empowered and feel supported, the talent, the energy, the optimism that those folks can engender for school communities is really powerful. And so I'm excited to see what our principals do to step forward and how we can, as a team, support them.
Ms. Raylan?
Not questions, more just things that I hope you'll be thinking about. One is, how does this connect to our upcoming strategic plan development? This is a huge, huge amount of work. Where does this fit? How all encompassing is this when we think about academics as just like a bucket? Given that that's the most important job that we are given as a district. And that's not to say that mental health and social emotional learning and good stewardship of finances, that those things aren't important. But like at the end of the day, people look to the school district to educate their child to their fullest potential, regardless of their identity. Second, I really like, and you've heard me say this, those 4 areas. I feel like those are the right areas. And at the same time, would love to see you be able to bring back to the board, not next time, but in the future, like, what do the measures of success look like for those 4 areas, maybe by school year or whatnot. So to your point, we know what we're aiming for, and I think that will help our school staff not maybe be scared by the like audacity or the ambitious nature of this plan, because one could look at this and get very overwhelmed. And I am super cognizant that our staff right now, just like everybody in the world, is exhausted. Like there's 0 left in the tank, and we have people that are giving everything they have to our students. And I don't think we have I feel like what I'm hearing on the ground is that folks are cautiously optimistic, but they're not ready to jump on the train yet. Because they've been burned before, and they've been told we want collaboration, and they've been told that, you know, it's going to be teacher centered. So I want us to think really critically about how we find that balance that somebody said between clear expectations so that folks know what they're aiming for and they're given a chance to learn and grow, and having the autonomy because it's that art and science. And what's our plan to bring folks along and not have this be top down? There's this, you know, Fisher and the schools thing that we have to acknowledge. And we're bringing in a lot of new hires, and that is a great opportunity. I've heard people say, what the heck's going on at the district? Everyone's leaving. This is a very natural thing to happen when there's a superintendent change. And yes, there's been some things happening, but this is a really important opportunity. I want us to make sure that it doesn't stay the district, not versus, but and the schools. Like, how do we actually leverage the hiring of these staff to change the interaction, change the culture of those opportunities for engagement, which I think, if based on what you're saying about like teacher leaders, like I feel like there's lots of opportunities in that structure. I just feel like we have to be very attentive to the reality of like, we're not coming in with everybody giving us like a full chance. We have to earn trust back. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we're being foolish, I think. And the other thing, just in terms of these new hires, very excited about them. Would love to hear more about what the board engagement will be in that hiring, being updated in terms of like what those pools are looking like. I know every district around the country right now is looking just like we are. And so I want us to make sure that we're being as thoughtful and engaging and helpful to you in that process, because it's a lot of people to hire in a short period of time.
Thank you, Ms. Raylan. Two thoughts I have. The first one being really strikes me on your slide on the principals being instructional leaders. I think for a lot of people that seems like an obvious thing, but I don't think we put our principals in a position where they can always be instructional leaders because they're managing day-to-day behavioral and mental health issues and all those things of our students. So definitely look for kind of an idea of how we're going to do that. It's a change management. They need to kind of understand that's a different expectation. Not to say that they don't have the skills or expertise to do it. I'm sure they do, but you know, if I'm managing students sent down to the office all day long, it's a little hard for me to go evaluate my teachers and what that looks like. So we need them to be evaluating teachers. We need them to be in the classrooms. I agree with everything that was in there. I just need to better understand how we're going to support them to do that. And I fully mean that as a we, because maybe there's things the board can do to help there. Maybe we're going to get into that in the ESSER funds, I imagine. So that's my first one. My second one is, Ms. Fraley touched on a little bit, kind of the strategic plan. You and I have had these conversations. Can you kind of outline a little bit what your timeline is for strategic plan? Obviously, this is going to be a big piece of it, just so folks know that that's all tying together. I think that's important.
In the next week, we will have a follow-up survey. So maybe I should back up. In the fall, as everyone knows, I conducted 15 different listening sessions. And through those listening sessions, there were over 100 surveys provided that provided some themes on what has emerged as issues and concerns. 3 of those major themes include academic strength and restoration, if you will. The second was retaining high quality instructional staff, high quality teachers. And the third is ensuring that we're closing achievement gaps. Those were 3 major things that came through the listening sessions. But what I would like to do is to take those themes and ensure that all stakeholders have one last chance to weigh in. And so we're going to distribute a survey in the next week to all families. And I want to also send it out to our high school students as well, so they have an opportunity to weigh in, to get some feedback. We'll take all of that data, make sure that those are 3 themes, and see if there are even more themes that are emerging. And then the process of engaging the board to identify what are the goals, because you have to set the goals for the organization. And so once you take a look at all of that data and truly define if those are the goals that you believe in, once you create those goals, then you'll, and I'll have this all laid out. I have this all laid out in a document, Mr. Doman, board members and community. Once you identify the goals, the next step is then to have a steering committee create measurable objectives to meet those goals. So those are the next few steps in the process.
So we're well underway in our strategic plan.
We're on our way. Yes.
Thank you for that.
So I have another comment, if I may, President Doman.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor, and then we'll come to this mute.
This is a tough conversation problem. Over the years, since we implemented our current teacher reward structure, teachers are vulnerable to retaliation for speaking what they think. And we need to fix that as the reference to behavior management in the classroom. I agree with that as well. And, you know, I know we're not agenda to talk about all these things, so I'll just go to say that is something we need to talk about to support the teachers. If we want them to buy in, if we want them to speak, if we want them to participate, they cannot be afraid of retaliation from administrators. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I guess along the same lines of my comment, the how matters. For example, we talked about proficiency. Every child should be proficient. That's much different. It could be much different than closing the achievement gap, or is it the same? And the how. So again, it's, you know, I realize that there's a lot of, you know, there were a lot of gaps and culture and systems and all the dialogue we had this evening. It's just the how matters most. because that will determine what's resourced, how it's resourced, the selection of materials, the mechanisms for monitoring and knowing what's successful, which the whole goal is student experience. So optimal student experience. So again, it all matters. It's the how.
Any other board comments? Go ahead, please.
Along with that, I'd also just like to add that success, especially at the high school level, looks really different for different students. So I would just like to see that that is protected for students who are super math oriented or social studies oriented or looking at going into the trades. Just seeing those avenues protected, I think, is really important going forward so that students can see success in their post-high school graduate careers and lives.
There's also a big disconnect between administration and the students, at least at my school. Whether it be that clubs want to do something and administration just shuts it down really quickly. So I think that when we're talking about establishing a relationship between administration and Fisher and students and administration, and then that all kind of goes together, we have to kind of look at the source of trying to work with students as they try to explore their creative avenues in the building. And I think that's going to establish a lot of trust, and you're going to get more honest feedback from things like that.
Thank you. Thank you both.
That's a great comment. I'm still new, and what I've observed in the district is that when strategies break down in the building level, we don't talk about building capacity of the leaders in the building. The narrative then pivots to what is the district going to do? That seems to be the narrative. And so I would like us to start building capacity of the building leaders to start going through and discussing. I think we need to have support systems in place so it doesn't get to a point of a breakdown first and foremost. And then discuss, so how can we empower the school community to support themselves? We quickly pivot to, so what will the district do? And I like to always say, if we're doing our jobs well, it should be about how we're supporting the school leadership and how the school leadership is taking their school to new heights. We haven't, I think when you look at that funnel, there's some missing pieces that's preventing that conversation from even happening.
Ms. Rail.
So just to respond to that, Dr. Means, and I don't think this was how you intended it, I think that is in response to conditioning, where perhaps folks have wanted to make decisions or do things and they have felt like there was pushback, there wasn't support from the district, et cetera. And so at a certain point, with kids, we call it learned helplessness. I think with adults, we just say you learn your lesson. And when you try and do something and you get shut down again and again, then you just stop trying to push things forward. And so I just want to make sure that as we're talking about empowerment, that has parameters around it, like you're saying, like that we're being clear as a board to district leadership. District leadership is being clear with school principals, like here's the box, like here are the things that you need to engage Fisher on, and here's where we need to have consistency, and here's where we entrust you because we have hired you to make these important decisions to do what's best for your school campus at East or West or Longfellow or wherever. Because I think sometimes, and I see this in my own company, right? Like at a certain point, you're like, okay, this is the way it's going to be. So I'm going to play the game as it's been set up. And what I'm hearing you say right now is, and what I think the board asked of you when you came in is dig in, figure out what's happening, and then let's set up a new game. Like let's set new parameters to give folks the tools they need, the expectations they need to be successful. Because to your point, teachers are being successful in spite of the roadblocks that we've put up, right? So let's just make things easier on everyone. And then students are the real winners.
To our student board members' point, the district shouldn't be involved in a conversation around should there be a student group or student club or not. That's between the building leadership and that student group. And I think there are a lot of instances where I've noticed where we have building leaders who are seeking permission for moving their schools forward. And so you're right, we have to create the conditions or maybe recalibrate to say, we trust leaders. And I think I alluded to this earlier, and you may make a mistake or a few in the process of leading your school. That's okay. We need to create the infrastructure to allow people to make those mistakes. I think this goes to where Sharon was going with the how. I want people, you can't be a learning environment, a learning organization if people are not able to make a mistake. And right now, I think there's a lot of people are tense. I think culturally, and they've shared this with me, they've said, well, that's not how we've operated in the past. And so I think this conversation we're having, so thank you, the conversation we're having right now where we want to empower not only principals, but teacher leaders, people who have good ideas to move us forward. That's how we grow. That's how we'll get better as a school district.
Any other board questions or comments, thoughts? Thank you everyone for the discussion on that. I think it was great. We will move on to superintendent reports, the 2022-23 calendar.
The calendar has been vetted by the superintendent advisory committee. That's a group of teacher leaders. They've looked at it, and I think the highlights are the first day of school is September 1st. We're not that far away from it for the 2022-2023 school year. You'll see the boxes symbolize in-service days. I think there's a total of 9 of those days. The commitment that I've made to our teacher leaders is that 3 of those days would be district days, 3 days would be school-based days, and 3 days are days that teachers are left alone. And I'm saying this publicly because I think people looked at me and didn't believe that I said that. But let me say it again. So 3 of the in-service days or box days are district-directed days. 3 days are directed by principals. My logic behind that is if principals are the ones, we just had a long conversation about this. If they're the ones who are leading school improvement plans, they have to have the vision for developing that professional learning for their staff. And 3 days have to be days where administrators have no ability to schedule a meeting, the only thing administrators should do that day is bring in food to help teachers that day. Otherwise, they should get out of the way. And I think we've identified those days. One of the highlights in this calendar, and it was difficult, it may be difficult for families, but please know it came from a teacher perspective. In January of 23, you'll note that the King holiday is on January 16th. For high school staff, having that professional development day on the 23rd is really critical to get ready for the second semester. And we discussed the fact that it would be difficult to have 2 Mondays off in a row, but it was with the mindset of high school staff really need that time and opportunity to get ready for second semester. I'm trying to think. We discussed at our last board meeting around voting. We do have that November 8th date off. That will be a gubernatorial election. Based on everything I'm hearing, that will be busy day. And so we decided to make sure that that's a professional development day for everyone involved. So if staff need to go vote, they should feel free to do that as well. The last day of school is identified as for everyone on June 9th. That's the calendar as we presented it.
Ms. Freeland?
So would that mean that graduation would be June 10th, most likely?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, if I can just put a plug in as well for us to get on the request for Hart Park. I feel like this has been a request that I know my friends and colleagues have had since my first kid graduated. So I just find it bizarre that the city would give the date to another outside organization versus the school district. So if that can be a priority now, even if they say the calendar's not up yet, say, great, pencil it in.
I believe they have penciled us in.
Okay.
We, again, as I stated earlier this evening, there was an attempt to get the Hart Park for this.
I know, that's my point, is
and
like, if we have to
it was
book
too
it
late.
3 years out, then
Yes.
let's start doing that.
Yes. So
Just on that topic, maybe, is there like a way we can get like a standing agreement with the Hart Park facilities, just so that this isn't an issue every year? I think
I'll
that's
add
something
that.
to look into.
I'll add that to my list of
An idea.
negotiation points for this.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point, right? It should be a standing one. It's always the
Right.
Second
Yeah.
Saturday
second
of
Saturday in June.
Yeah.
That should be an easy one for us to
Right.
accomplish. yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people wanting graduation at Hart Park for my whole life. And so, yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I think the we've talked about negotiations tongue in cheek, but I think the one issue is the field covering.
Yeah.
That is the expensive part, and they have their own covering tools that they want to use. It's somewhere in the neighborhood when you get the stage and the covering, it costs about $10,000 to $15,000 for everything in place. So if we're going to negotiate prices, I think that's where prices come into play.
Any other board questions, comments on the school calendar item? Seeing none, we'll move on to ESSER funds plan.
Jeremy, if we could display the next presentation. Thank you, Jeremy. So there have been a lot of discussion around ESSER and the timeline. There have been 3 different ESSER plans presented. The first was in March of 2020, right in the midst of the shutdown. And the Walla School District has used the funds from ESSER 1. Those funds were primarily for PPE and cleaning sake and those types of materials. We've exhausted ESSER 1 dollars. ESSER 2 was passed in December of 2020, and it starts to move into a different phase of funding. It's to supplant and support school districts and organizations coming out of the pandemic and some of the challenges. The funds available through ESSER 2 must be spent by September 30th of 2023. It's an important date to keep in mind. In March of 2021, so last year, March, there was the American Rescue Plan Act that was enacted, and that was approved. Now, the reason why our school district moved a little bit slower than other districts is that we watched very closely some of the legislative challenges that the state had with the Department of Public, or excuse me, the Department of Education at the federal level. But I'm pleased to report that all of our ESSER funds have been secured at the state level. We're moving forward, and all of those funds have to be spent by September 30th of 2024. In addition to the ESSER funds, Jeremy, if we can go to the next slide. Thanks to our prudent and conservative budgeting for this school year, there was a total of $793,613 provided to the school district, this school district, the Walla Tulsa School District, through the governor, through his, through the state's American Rescue Plan Act money. And what Governor Evers decided to do was to distribute those funds to school districts because of the gap in funding that was caused by the legislature. In addition, there was a FEMA grant that we received for a total of $485,000. So when you add the ESSER funds that we have from ESSER 3, remaining funds from ESSER 2, and the funds from the governor's discretionary funding and FEMA grant dollars, we have quite a few dollars. And Jeremy, if you can go to the next slide, please. You'll see, and I know that's kind of small print, but there's a grand total of $5,956,265.80. That's when you add all the different funds, and I didn't count our special education dollars that we received through the rescue plan dollars as well. And I want to thank, we have a community member who's pointed out to us that there's money in that bucket as well. There's quite a few dollars that's available to our school district. Now, there's some set-asides that we have to keep in mind, and Jeremy, if we can go to the next slide. In those set-asides, the set-asides are in essence set up for us to put money aside for at least 20% of the population that is considered underperforming, or the population that is considered to be disadvantaged, that we have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of that student population. Typically, the way that the Department of Education or the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has defined that 20%, it could be students with special education needs, it could be students of color, it could be students who are demonstrating significant academic deficiencies coming out of the pandemic. Those are typically the way that we identify those students. And so you'll see in the proposal of positions and items that we've created, there are programs and positions that are specifically focused on certain students and their needs. So, Jeremy, we can go to the next slide. I think I shared this slide in the last time I made this presentation to you in terms of an ESSER update. Most of this money should be viewed as one-time funds. The federal government created the ESSER dollars in essence to help us recover from COVID-19 and the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic. It will create a funding cliff if we assume we can keep these positions and not make any decisions in our budget moving forward. What I would just share with you is that I do believe that this is an opportunity, at least for the next 2 years, for us as an organization to determine if we need these positions or not. Some of the positions that are proposed this evening, I think they address exactly what I heard from many of you. So Mr. Doman asked the question, so how are we going to support principals to become principal leaders and instructional leaders? What systems do you have in place? Some of the positions that are proposed here this evening should alleviate and take away some of the stress of a burden that some people have in their building, their schools, so they can do their work more effectively. So while some will call this a one-time expense, I call this an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to quickly support students who are coming out of the pandemic and for the organization to determine what do we truly need moving forward. Chairman? So we focused on 3 items, and these 3 items are items that emerged again from my listening sessions and from me going to faculty meetings and having listening sessions internally. I tried to stay away from the term academic recovery. I think everyone's using academic recovery. And going back to the earlier presentation, I think restoring who we have been, restoring our reputation as a school district is the focus of Area 1. Area 2 is a focus on students' social, emotional, and mental health. And then focus area number 3 is expanding student, family inclusion, and belonging opportunities. One thing that I've noticed is that there are families and students who don't believe they belong in Walla, Tulsa. They don't believe that they have an advocate internally. They believe that we don't want them here. There's a shell, there's a barrier that they come to meetings with. If they come to the meetings, if they even attend the meetings, they're on guard. And if we truly want to be a welcoming, inclusive community, this seems to be something that we have to work on. Jeremy? So you'll see we broke down where we're spending our funds here. Focus area 1 is the academic restoration of the district. About 41% of the dollars that we are proposing is in that area. The majority, 53.2%, falls into that social emotional space. And the belonging picks up the remainder, which is 5.7%. Jeremy, please. Thank you. That's hard to read. We'll break that down into each area in a few minutes. But there's a total of 13 different proposals that we're presenting to the community and the board to consider. Jeremy? The first area is academic restoration, and there are a total of five recommendations here. The first is to increase our staffing. We currently have a 0.5 teacher or a half teacher that focuses on gifted and talented support. The recommendation here is to increase that by 1.5 to get it up to 2. I'm not totally satisfied with 2 gifted and talented teachers for a district our size, but I wanted to start here because, again, so often we talk about the academic recovery of students. There's some students who persevered and did really well over the last 2 years who are ready to really move forward. And so let's not lose sight that those students have done well. How are we extending and expanding learning opportunities for those students? The second is adding an additional instructional technology specialist. Currently, right now, we have one person. Her name is Beth Kimmel, and she's an amazing educator. But she's by herself, and right now her title is Elementary Innovation Specialist. What we're proposing to do is to just lean in and call her what she is, which is our instructional technology specialist, but then to hire someone else. We very rapidly and not strategically leaped in and purchased Chromebooks for every student in the district. It's time for us to step back, become strategic, and discuss what is our plan with a one-to-one initiative. Before the pandemic, we were one-to-one at the high school level. Are we prepared to go one-to-one at the middle school level? Makes sense, but are we prepared? And if we're prepared to do that, do we have someone who can support that work? At the same time, we moved to Canvas and we moved to other instructional technology tools since the pandemic. We need to give Ms. Kimmel and others time to figure out what does that mean to create professional learning internally. So when I use the terminology internal professional learning, this is what I mean, giving people that opportunity. Increase our high school instructional coaching to 3. Right now, we have 2 instructional high school coaches. Those coaches focus on math and science. Our recommendation is that we hire a 3rd to support our teachers in English. We have a new ELA program that we've adopted from kindergarten to 8th grade. How are we ensuring some level of articulation going into the high school level? That's the reason or the idea behind that recommendation. Increase of 5.0 FTEs for elementary academic specialists. The feedback I have received from the district and from teachers is that we have young people who have academic challenges and gaps. And the language that I normally hear is that if the school doesn't have Title I dollars, there isn't anyone there to support the deficiencies and to build the academic gaps that those students have. This proposal is to identify 1 academic specialist for every 2 elementary schools we have in the district to support our students who are struggling academically. So that doesn't fall on the shoulders of the classroom teacher. So they can schedule time to support those students and to figure out what do we need from an intervention standpoint to help young people grow academically. It's not enough to say, yes, we're coming out of the pandemic and students are behind, but how are we going to work with those young people? And then finally, we did something really courageous. We adopted a new ELA or English Language Arts curriculum in the summer of the pandemic, of the start of the pandemic. The reading curriculum that we adopted, the English Language Arts curriculum that we adopted, is one of the most complex English Language Arts curriculums that you can purchase. And it requires a lot of professional learning. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were unable to provide that professional learning. So for the last 2 years, teachers have received the materials for the new curriculum, but really haven't received the ample and appropriate level of professional learning to use said materials effectively. This is what I mean by we have really good teachers, because despite our challenges, they're persevering. The recommendation here is that we relaunch our teaching professional development plan. The teaching professional plan would be a 4-day professional learning workshop for teachers. On the 5th day, emphasizing the importance of principals. On the 5th day, we would have 1 day of professional learning just for principals. So the expectation would be principals would be there for all 4 days, but then there will be a 5th day for the principals to make sure they are supporting those teachers appropriately. So that's the first area of academic restoration. I'll try to go through this quickly so we can get to your questions. I'm really hoping to have a good conversation with you. Under student social, emotional, and mental health, the first recommendation is to create a director of student success. Currently, what happens in our district is that if a student is dysregulated, non-compliant, and the principal doesn't know what to do with that student, they will call the district office to say, I don't know what to do. Do you have any suggestions? And they're looking either for me as the superintendent, or they're not quite sure who else to call. In some cases, they'll call the school resource officer, which now has kicked this, candidly, has put us into now a school to prison pipeline situation. The director of student success position would be a person who is an expert, has an expertise that can give principals and classroom teachers and others strategies to handle non-compliant, dysregulated students. The reality of it is coming out of this pandemic, more students are dysregulated more than ever. If we had a situation before the pandemic where 20% of our students were non-compliant, that number has probably moved up to 40% now in some cases. And so how to handle non-compliant students, you need strategies. And you have to have someone who has those strategies handy. A teacher needs to have the ability to email someone to say, I don't know what to do with this student anymore. I've talked to my principal. Do you have any suggestions? To have someone say, I'll be in your classroom on Thursday and let's observe that student together. That's what teachers are looking for. We can't continue just to say to suspend the students and move them out. There has to be a middle ground. So that's what that person in that position would do. Increase counseling at the secondary level. We would want to increase counseling at the secondary level where there would be an additional counselor provided at each middle school and each high school. That would bring the student to counselor ratio down to about 200 to 1, which is below the national recommendation for student to counselor ratio. We believe if we are able to do that, to the statement that was made earlier, now instead of the principal serving as that counselor, now there's another expert that can work with the student while the principal is perhaps in a classroom observing instruction. Create elementary behavioral specialist positions. We would create a total of 5 of those positions, 1 going to 2 schools. A behavioral specialist would be someone who would work in conjunction with that director of student success. Someone who's going into elementary schools. If student A is someone who is not following the student code of conduct and not following rules and constantly in trouble, you can only suspend students so much. There needs to be some level of strategy that's put in place. Often I go into buildings and I'll ask the first question, how many behavior intervention plans are in place? Now, a behavior intervention plan, or we call it in education a BIP plan. That is a plan that you should have in place to measure to see if the strategies, the interventions that you put in place are actually working. If they work, then you do more of them. If they don't work, then you revise it and you change the plan. Our teachers, our principals are so overwhelmed with the sheer volume of students who are dysregulated and non-compliant, that they're unable to develop those plans. But furthermore, we don't have experts in the organization that you can turn to say, who's my behavioral specialist? Who can pop in a classroom and stay in that room with me for a half day to figure out if this behavior intervention plan is working? That's the rationale behind this position. I'm pleased to say that we submitted 2 proposals to the city of Walla, Tulsa, as they have rescue dollars as well. And they encouraged us to submit plans or proposals to them. The one proposal was to have 2 extra school nurses / community nurses financed by the city. According to their vetting process, those 2 positions, that proposal was deemed a tier 1 proposal. That means, I hope, the likelihood is that it will be financed by the city for a 2-year period. The second proposal that I submitted was to have the city finance 2 additional social workers. That would be school social workers, community social workers. Really excited about those 2. That was also deemed a tier 1 proposal, likelihood that they should be financed. Going back to school nursing, we currently have 4.5 nurses in the district. If we're able to receive the 2 additional nurses from the city. That'll get us up to 6.5. But if we can gain one more nursing FTE, that will allow Caitlin, you've all seen Caitlin, that will allow Caitlin to be more strategic and not to be someone who's working in a school, and to have more of a policy-driven focus on what do our policies need to look like moving forward. She would have more opportunity to be forward-thinking in our policies, but more importantly, also having the ability to work in conjunction with our social workers and our counselors and our principals around other issues that deals with social, emotional, and physical health. Securing a mentor services program for chronically disruptive students. It's been very fascinating to me that when I have administrative hearings and I ask families, who's your mentor? I ask the young people, do you have a mentor or someone in your life? A lot of the families will say no. Mentor Greater Milwaukee is an organization that provides mentorships and provides mentors for young people who don't have someone in their lives. This would be a $15,000 expenditure where they would provide not only mentors for our chronically disruptive students, but they would also teach our staff how to create relationships with kids. That's the part that I'm really excited about. So it's not just us outsourcing the mentorship piece, but it's teaching our staff how to build those relationships with kids who are difficult to connect with at times. Restorative justice training for staff. It's not enough to suspend a student and then have them come back and not restore what happened to them prior to the suspension. It's not enough just to say, come back and forget that things happened or behave or else. We have to restore and build people up within a community again. I'm really pleased to say that we have community members and parents who are trained in restorative justice, who have been helping us in developing a restorative justice framework. But to truly train all of our staff in this space would be really important. And so to that end, creating a restorative justice training model would be important. And then finally, what I've discovered over this time in the district so far is that we do lack what I would consider to be an opportunity for a break for students and the school to have a separation time. Sometimes you need that separation time. CISA 1 offers and they host a lot of different alternative placements or alternative schools. But as we've discussed, coming out of COVID-19 and the pandemic, every student in every school district has had troubles and an increase in behavioral challenges. And so spaces in alternative schools have been a premium and you just can't find them. The suggestion here is for us to create our own, I wouldn't call it an alternative school, I would call it an alternative placement classroom, where for a maximum of 8 weeks, a regular education student is placed in another classroom where we're doing two things. We're keeping them updated with their academics, but we're also building their capacity in learning how to regulate themselves. They're learning a skill to manage difficult situations when they face them. The feedback I'm receiving from staff members and from principals is that they don't have anywhere to place those students. And so and candidly, I'm hearing it from families, I'm hearing it from parents, that when we suspend students, or in some cases when students are sent out of the class, and then students and teachers see that student come back the next hour in the same class or a different class, it sends a message that we're not doing something, that we're not trying to address the needs of that student from a social emotional standpoint and build their capacity. So developing an alternative placement classroom for students in grades 4 through 6 would be the ideal. We would have a general education teacher along with a paraprofessional or an educational assistant, and that's where the $150,000 come into play. Jeremy? The last area is expand student and family inclusion belonging. There's 2 options here. The one is to create a family engagement coordinator. There have been too many families, ranging from our special education families to our families of color, who have said, we don't feel like we've been heard. We don't have an advocate in the district. And so what happens is that those families feel that they have to battle the district. Further, we don't do a good job in ensuring that all voices are at the table when it's time for decision-making to take place, that various voices are heard. I think we saw it a little bit this evening. Some would argue we shouldn't need a community member to remind us to have the closed caption component on for our meetings. If you have a family engagements coordinator who's connecting with various stakeholder groups in the community, and those messages are being delivered, and that's their sole job, to connect with those stakeholder groups, those messages will then filter up. I think what's happening as I'm seeing things is that these messages are being delivered by people with good intent, but people's buckets are so full right now that component of being a true advocate for family engagement may not be the primary focus sometimes. It should be, but in order for us to truly be inclusive, this is a suggestion. And then our website needs renewal. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm going to pause here and see if you have any questions on the proposals.
May I speak?
Ms. Muffeld's going to go first. She had her hand up. Mr. Meyer.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll start off with a couple questions. Are there job descriptions for all of the ESSER positions?
Yes.
Okay, can we receive copies of them?
I don't think you have, but we can.
Okay.
Yes, I'll make sure you get them.
Okay, thank you. And are the director positions working positions? So, or do they have staff people that support them? I mean, I think you've answered a couple of my questions in your discussion. For example, the director of student success would work with the behavioral bit people. Okay. Okay. Behavioral intervention plan. Okay. Yeah. So I guess for the positions, who is supporting them and how is a bit unclear to me, but if I see the job descriptions, I think that'll help clear that up. And I guess my third question is, with the 2 options available, either finding a way to fund the positions going forward if we think they're effective, or non-renewing them if we decide we can't continue them or we want to do something different, what would be the timeline and how would we do that?
I'll answer the last question. But I'm going to capture that question and put it in writing so we can capture this as well. But these are 2-year, when you go back to the fact that we have to spend money by 2024, we have a 2-year runway in essence with the 2023 and the 23-24 school year. So I would say by June of 2023, we will identify, I think out of fairness, we would need to identify for people, we either see the ability to find a space in our budget, or we don't see a future beyond June of 2024.
or we restructure again.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. So it's either gonna be, I think out of fairness to people, we should let them know, no, they shouldn't go into the school year not knowing their future. So they should either go into that final school year knowing this is my final year in this role, or they should go into the school year knowing, the district knowing that we need to find other efficiencies in the budget.
Thank you. I like to hear other feedback and students' input before I ask any more questions.
Mr. Meyer?
Hi, yeah. We forgot public comment on the teaching and learning reports. So I don't know what we can do about that now, but we'll have comment after this report, right?
We've moved, I talked about this at the beginning of the meeting, Mr. Meyer, and I apologize if it didn't come through clear, but tonight we're going to discuss these things. We have now a place for people to ask questions about these things because we're not voting on them tonight. So for the next 2 weeks, we'll give the public an opportunity to kind of ask those questions and things like that. And then they come to the meeting on the 28th, where we're going to take some votes on these and advocate for what position they feel they would like us to take. So instead of kind of getting questions tonight, we'll move forward in that direction.
But we haven't discussed this in a detailed way to do this without any warning. Our process has been to, on the first reading, hear public comment because it can inform our thinking in a public way in the public square. So this isn't an in-service format. So you're doing what you do. I'll just say I'm surprised by this. So I'll move to this report and say that Dr. Means, my strong preference is that our plans emphasize things that provide service directly to students, service or interventions. And so I ask that you consider that. And then I'm not clear what we're doing for students with disabilities, if they're implicit in some of these other areas, or if there's special needs that we need to address individually, such as speech therapy kinds of things, where there's been falling behind in that area as well. I'm assuming over the course of the past period of time with the COVID. I know, myself, a stutterer, that I emphasize with those folks quite a bit. Can you speak to that a little bit, please, Dr. Means?
Yes, Mr. Meyer, I was just writing a note. I think what we should do is create some type of spreadsheet very similar to what I have here in regards to what has been purchased with the special education ESSER dollars. I think it's been requested from the public, and we just haven't it. So I would allow me to work with the director of special education and Mr. Dixon to account for how those funds have been utilized and where they've been leveraged.
So we have everything all in one place so that they can see and reference back to that. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fraley.
So these are just nitty gritty and you don't have to answer now, but for instance, director of student success is a 0.5 position. So does that mean that other 0.5 of their time is in schools, in classrooms, et cetera? Or is it actually a 0.5 position? And
it's a 1.0 position. I think there's some efficiencies we can find in this year's budget to offset the additional 0.5.
Okay. And I'm not saying that we have to. I think there's actually real value sometimes in having someone keeping one foot in the classroom so that they understand what it's really like in the field. And this may be what Mr. Meyer was getting at, but I'm thinking specifically about special education, students with special needs. When we look at the elementary academic specialists, the way I understood that is that is like a one-to-one. So if I'm thinking back to 2005 when we had early literacy intervention, my kid was pulled out of reading twice a week to get one-on-one with Mrs. Dunville at Jefferson. And that additional one-on-one got them from being a non-reader in first grade to being just fine, because we know that if kids can read by third grade, they're going to be good for the most part. Do we see that one-to-one? How do we make sure that we're looking at who that one-to-one is covering? And is that all students? Is that certain populations of students, et cetera? In terms of the increase in counseling at the secondary level, I'm curious, you had talked about increasing is it 2 at each of the high schools?
It would be 1 at each secondary school.
1 at each secondary school. And is this a counselor like A through E now versus A through G, or is this like possibly school psychologist or social worker? Will the school leader have the opportunity to say, like, this is what we need? And the reason I ask that question is I hear what you're saying about an advisor, someone who's there to like be there for kids. And also recognizing that every relationship is a little bit different. But what I hear anecdotally is that kids are not going to their counselor except for class stuff. They are going to the school psychologist, they're going to the social worker, and those folks are very overworked and do not have the bandwidth to be meeting student need. So I would just encourage us to think really critically about like what it is we're trying to accomplish there, because is this a career and college readiness sort of situation, which is very different than coming out of COVID social emotional situation.
Thank you for that. May I just?
Yeah, I just don't want you to think you have to respond to all these questions.
That one is just so important. And I think, so if I wasn't an administrator, I would have wanted to be a social worker. And I think my social worker friends would say, historically, they would say that we do a poor job in providing counseling at the secondary level. That counseling at the secondary level is about classes and what class you sign up for. But counselors would respond by saying, well, it's about that because our student to counselor ratios are so high.
Right.
This would be very unique. The only other place I'm even aware of in the next 2 to 3 state ratio that has a student to counselor ratio like this is New Trier in Illinois, where the ratio is that low. And when you get to that level, it's not about college and career readiness, it's about who are you as a person? And the counselor having enough time to say, so I want to talk to Sean. Now, if we talk about Sean's post-secondary aspirations, great. But I just want to understand who he is. We haven't created that model, but I appreciate your feedback. And I think that's important I'll take that back to the secondary principals to see if that is their preference to just have an additional person, right? But the initial vision was to lower that student to counselor ratio so then we can change the paradigm for counseling in the district, where it's not about let's go to your counselor for a course change, but go to your counselor to have a conversation.
I totally appreciate that, but a paradigm shift in 2 years, if that's at the point which is a tall order, given the culture that you're trying. It's like Sean, you said earlier, like steering the battleship or whatever. Like that's a pretty big culture shift, especially at the high school level. My last question in terms of specific things, and I'll email you some other things for our follow-up the end of this month, is I really appreciate the alternative classroom model, but I am sort of curious, like this is one alternative classroom. Are we saying this is elementary and secondary? Like I can't see those two things going together. If it's elementary, one class, like I want us to make sure that we are not over promising and under delivering on something like this, because I think there is this, where's the line at which point a child would have this opportunity? Because I really see it as a benefit to the student, the family, the teacher, the principal, to have that break, to reset, and to successfully bring the child back into the school, that it is not like you're sent away, that you have done wrong, you can't come back from this. And given that we're saying one classroom, that means they're leaving their school.
Yes.
And what does that actually mean? So love the idea behind it. You know, I feel like we've had several situations this year where something like this would have worked really well. I also think that it's a pretty big undertaking, and I'm curious, where have we seen this work in other districts successfully, so that we're not just trying to recreate the wheel?
So in the ESSER document that I share with you, there's a hyperlink that goes to the description of what this classroom is. It would be for grades 4 through 6. So it's a very narrow promise that we're making. It's only for grades 4 through 6.
Yeah, sorry, I did not.
No, that's okay. And the classroom, and we're very clear to say the adult to student ratio is 4 to 1. So it caps the number of students that can be in it as well. Because usually when you create these types of classrooms, every principal will have maybe
that's my point. Like, I'm sure every principal could give you 2 as of today.
And I think the one thing that is different from other models that I've seen is that we've also, I'm recommending the creation of a community oversight committee, a community oversight committee to ensure that there's no disproportionality in the representation of the students who are recommended for placement. Right? I mean, so if we're just going to be candid, we want to make sure that if you go and see students in that classroom, that it doesn't look like all the students don't look the same. And so to have community members who are going to provide some oversight and we are going to have to be accountable to, in addition to you, the board, I felt was very important.
And I'll just say, I was very excited to see you starting with gifted and talented. Like, equity means all, I think, is something that we all have to keep in the forefront, as I feel like the word equity has become a buzzword for negative things versus us meeting the needs of every single student in this district.
I want to be very clear. I don't know how the Walla Tulsa School District has met the needs effectively of gifted students with a 0.5. And we haven't had the ability to move in the language, because in that world, the terminology is truly gifted and talented. So there are some students who may not qualify for gifted services based on their assessment score, but they still may have a talent. So student X may not score and be identified as a gifted student, but they still may be a brilliant orator. They still may be a brilliant artist. And so to tap into that Howard Gardner multiple intelligences and lift that up, we haven't. What I'm finding again is that what we're doing is actually creating an equitable system in Walla Tulsa, because parents find other ways to meet those needs, because they've analyzed the district and said the district doesn't have either the capacity or the resources, so we'll just do it ourselves. So then what happens is a sliver of kids receive those services, but everyone doesn't receive those services.
And let me be clear, when I say we haven't met that need, that is not a crack at the person who is responsible for that. 0.5 person cannot meet the needs of 7,000 students.
Right.
So they're just not set up for success. So this is moving us closer.
Any other board questions, comments, thoughts?
Yes, I have another comment, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'm gonna object to this whole process, because this idea of taking no public comment on a multi-million-dollar discussion like this, summarily imposed on the community, I think it's wrong. I'm also surprised that the other 5 board members are not surprised by what we're doing tonight, I'd like to know where this change in process was decided and who was involved in the decision, who was informed ahead of time. This is not my idea of open government in a public school district. Thank you.
Mr. Meyer, we're not particularly agendaed to discuss this, but I will share with you, this is what we discussed as a board at our in-service meeting. This is the format that Dr. Means had talked about he had used in the past, and this is what we had.
Right, and it was a general conversation, and we haven't had any discussion on implementation details.
Mr. Meyer, so our plan is that we will share the information tonight. Well, the public has several weeks to give us their input, ask questions, instead of having questions asked during the meeting, which is very difficult because they get frustrated that questions don't get answered. We want to give them an opportunity to ask those questions. And then on the 28th, certainly there will be public comment where folks can advocate for the position that they would like us to take. So this is what we had discussed in the past. I appreciate that you don't agree, but let's move on with the discussion for tonight. Anybody else have questions or comments around? That's your point. Mr. Ron, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I mean, it's great to see kind of a flooding of resources and this federal funding to give us this ability would be great. It's great to see us be able to try to pilot a few things and see what sticks, what works. The questions I've got are, I guess if we're going to try this alternative placement classroom, I would hope that we can get frequent updates. Can we go and check this thing out? That thing, I understand the need for it. I also have, all sorts of concerns and alarm bells going off in my mind of like, what are we creating? I am uneasy about that, to be sure. I understand why folks would be asking for it, but then I can understand how it could be used in the wrong way. And that may not happen. It may not. So to the extent that this board can have frequent accountability and eyes and like reports and discussions with the people who are, operating that, it's just a new thing. And I want to make sure that if we're going to do that, and if it's not going well, that we also make the call, swiftly to say like, let's fail fast, and if it doesn't work, let's just stop doing it. So that's one. Number two, I see in the report that we've got 3.486 million for discretionary programs, right? Right. And then this asks for 2.671. So that leaves about like 800,000 or so left over. So I'm just curious, is that for like revenue loss, or is that for some kind of other thing that we haven't quite mapped out yet? Or just how does that 800,000 or so dollars get mapped out? Is that going to be part of the conversation this evening or in future meetings, or just what's the plan for that piece of the puzzle?
That's later. I'll have to come back with a plan or update on how we're planning to close dollar.
Okay. And that's just because we're not ready to share. We've got a good idea, but
I think ultimately the $800,000 will be combined with the governor's discretionary funds and the FEMA dollars and pay for the additional years of requests. If I'm understanding your question.
And the slide 5 is the one I'm looking at. It says there's some set asides.
Yes.
But then there's a balance left over of 3.486 million that would not be set aside, right? And that could be used for other things,
right?
This stuff included, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So then if this price tag of all of these things is 2.671, then that would leave like 800,000 left over for something, I think, unless it's not, and you can tell me different.
But I think that dollar amount is 1 year, or, so if you take, we're hoping for some of those positions to be 2-year runway.
Right.
That dollar amount is just for one time costing.
Okay. And would this be enough? I don't know. Maybe I could take that offline. And maybe it would be
It is
helpful to
enough
see.
when you, that's what I'm suggesting. When you bring in the governor's discretionary funds, and the FEMA dollars, and then you take the 2.6, add the additional dollars, which I think comes out to another $1.2 million. You have enough for a 2-year runway.
Yeah, I guess if I can see that
Sure.
mapped out in the next presentation or in between. If this is a 1-year outlook, it would be helpful to see then what year 2 would be.
Okay.
I could probably figure that out by looking at one-time costs versus, right. So it looks like the one-time costs that are on this grid wouldn't add up to 1 point.
No, I think the one-time cost is the $250,000.
Yeah, right.
There's only a few one-time costs in there.
Right. Yeah.
I think the website's the other one-time cost, actually.
Right. So that's where I'm like, how would that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll map that out.
Yeah, two quick questions. Yeah, one follow-up to Sharon's. I'd love to see what the new org chart's going to look like to make sure that our supported people are supported, and there's some moving parts. And so me being a visual person, being able to see that and understand how everything plugs in and fits together before we meet again, that would be awesome. And then I'd love to hear about your attraction strategies, as we know it's a tight market and teachers are looking at permanent positions versus a 1-year or a 2-year, just to understand, like, how do we do that? What are some of the things that we're going to use to attract top talent? Just some of the strategies there. I'd love to hear that as well. I know it's going to be difficult, so I want to be proactive about understanding those and seeing how we can help.
Mr. Rowland, do you have one more?
Yeah, thank you. One last question is just related to Mentor Greater Milwaukee. With just like going with a specific provider. I know it's like under our 20,000 to talk about, but I just want to make sure that if there are other, mentorship programs, that we should be considering those and weighing those. And if this is the best fit based on that analysis, then that makes sense. But I just want to make sure, that we don't.
I'm not aware of another
go down a path that we don't want to go down a path.
No, I'm not aware of another program that provides actual mentors. Maybe you have their brothers and sisters.
Right.
There's an actual contractual relationship with this organization that they ensure a mentor that will work with kids. That's very unique. I'm not aware of another organization. If there are other organizations, I would gladly listen to their pitch. Okay, I'm not aware of any. So I would consider that organization a sole source.
Yeah. But do we have anybody to triple check? Or should we look, or I don't know, things are lean right now, right? So just to like be sure, I don't know, at the same time.
If there are board members who are aware of other organizations that I've missed.
And I don't know. I don't want us to go down a path of.
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
But I would be, if I need to be corrected or if there's someone with knowledge, I would be very happy to receive it.
Thank you.
Dr. Joseph.
So one of the things I'm kind of really curious about, and I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this. I know you've been gathering feedback through a lot of different venues. I know that there's 4 sessions set up for community input in the coming several days or weeks. I'm really curious about kind of the longer term viability of this model. I like wherever we can nest positions as close to students as possible. I see that as an important component. I'm curious about the family engagement coordinator and how do we get them as close to the schools as possible? So in an ideal world, each school has somebody where that's a dedicated part of their responsibility. Because it feels like schools aren't connected to the district. Families aren't connected to the district. They're connected to the classroom, to the school. And so that one, I would like to kind of hear more thoughts on how do they drive those relationships. And I hear what you're saying. They need an advocate who's got a big enough pulpit and a voice here to hear them to raise those questions and those components too. So I think figuring out how to balance those two pieces to me seems really important. Use the phrase dysregulation several times. And this is, I think, something I've certainly been thinking a great deal about over the last 18 months of kids in dysregulation and dialectical behavioral therapy and kind of how to integrate some things. This is one of these words that if you're listening online right now or in the room, you may have never heard the word dysregulation, and you will suddenly hear it everywhere now. And so I think it's something that is incredibly important to help our students develop the capacity to regulate when they're in a state of dysregulation. And how do we integrate these things into the curriculum? So there's kind of the acute components that we're talking about when a student is in extreme dysregulation. But what are the other things that we can do? And that may not be part of this plan, but as we think about the strategic plan, the conversations that we had earlier tonight before this, that's a kind of a component that I'm thinking about of how do we almost so in a similar way to what you were discussing with restorative justice. How do we help teachers develop the skills and capacity to build this? How can this be built into the curriculum where students have this capacity to regulate in the midst of bumping into things that would lead them into dysregulation? So something I was thinking about. I'm really intrigued by, at some point when I was thinking about the ESSER funds, I was thinking about how do we as a district utilize these to maximize impact, knowing that we need people to do it, but we can't, how do we have these positions not be temporary with the same funding that we have? And so I'm curious to kind of know more about that, of the, you certainly do, I think, a good job of talking about that within the narrative that you shared. But I would love to know how these fit in with, to Mr. Phillips, I think, really good point. How do these fit in with the other strategies of the reorganization, with our vision that is starting to come together, with the vision of the graduate and building that pieces out? We've talked a lot about vision, but how do they all cohere? And I know we've kind of like, we're redesigning the plane as we're flying it to a degree. So I get that it's a big challenge. And Leanne made the good point earlier, people are tired. So how do we do all this and make sure that we're taking the input of all the staff, the people in the positions, counselors, social workers, and so on? And that's kind of one of the key pieces I'm thinking about is what's the 4 to 5 years from now, if we've got this inflow of resources to take care of acute problems for learning loss, for socio-emotional interventions, how do we build this into the structure in a way? And maybe it's a different staffing model, but how do we keep the momentum and we don't lose that after 2 years? The other thing I'm curious about is I'm not against the idea of more nurses. I just don't understand the need, and so would benefit from a little bit more about that as we go forward to understand where that is and how that impact is. So kind of some initial thoughts, and I think Sharon's good point earlier. Would love to hear from the students on this as well. So your insights are always appreciated.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
Well, I'm a little disappointed that we're not de-asbestizing the third floor east, but that's okay.
Oh, I want to do that so badly. So yes.
I know, right?
Yes.
It's like, I almost feel like it's an urban legend now. But I really liked the addition of the school counselor at the at the secondary level, just because the counselors are already stretched very thin. And when Dr. Means, I believe, was talking about the school culture of not going, or maybe it was Mrs. Fraley, of not going to your counselor, school counselors do have to write letters of recommendation for college. And I know that a lot of college admissions processes really, really rely on that letter of rec saying, this is what the student is about. And a lot of my friends are finding themselves in their senior year of high school saying like, I don't have this relationship with my counselor. I don't know them. They don't know me, more importantly. So how are they going to be able to put into words what kind of a student, what kind of a person I am? And so whether we're changing a school societal type of thing to go see your counselor, or just frankly adding someone to that support staff, I think is going to be really valuable, especially to kind of like nip that issue in the bud almost, to like promote seeing your counselor if there's just an influx of them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd like to echo what you said. I think that lowering that ratio will allow the opportunity for these relationships to be built, which is super important. Personally, I have not been able to have that experience with my counselor, and I don't know many people that have. So even if, to Ms. Fraley's point, they're not like school psychologists, at least I think that having that relationship would allow them to be more of a resource for specific students. And I think that'll be really beneficial going forward. But my worry is that these are temporary roles, and mental health decline is not exclusive to COVID. I think that having these roles and these positions going forward will be really important, and keeping that ratio low will be really important. And then I'd also just, I don't know, I guess I'm just wondering what mental health resources look like for staff as well, because that's also not exclusive to high school students.
Ella, I think you're so very insightful. And candidly, I think the mental health support is having a behavioral specialist. So if you have that third grader who keeps misbehaving and you don't know what to do, if you have a behavioral specialist that you can email and say, can you please come to my classroom on Wednesday? That alone, from the feedback I've received from teachers, is a relief. It's a burden that is taken off their plates. For principals, they've shared with me, it has been interesting because I've been filling the role of director of student services this year. And so principals will call, and initially they didn't want to call. They said, we know you're busy, we're not going to bother you. I think the reality of the school year has set in, so they call now. And they just need thought partners. They just need someone to say, I have Mike. I've suspended Mike already for 7 days. When I call Mike's parents, they're frustrated with the school. Do you have any suggestions? And we may talk for 30 minutes. That's hard for me right now because that's 30 minutes of not addressing board needs or community needs or other things. To have an expert who can listen to that message and say, oh, sure, Principal X, here's 5 strategies you should try between now and next week. And then I'll come over and let's have coffee and meet and talk about it next week. And then the last thing I would say, because Dr. Jessup Anger said something that I thought, when I presented this to our administrative team, someone brought up this suggestion and it was not even on my radar. We have some families who are clashing with principals, and so the thought of having a family engagement coordinator serving as that liaison came to mind. An administrator made the statement of, and so I used the example of maybe that family engagement coordinator and the family can go and have a coffee. You know, sometimes those families don't want to meet at school. They want to meet somewhere in the community and on a neutral site. An administrator said, is there any possibility that family engagement coordinator could fill in for the principal, and the principal and the social worker go meet with the parent offsite? So we're building authentic relationships where we're putting down our weapons, and we're trying to rebuild a relationship in a very thoughtful way. You mentioned the mental health piece. I think all those things are elements of how things are weighing people down, and people are walking away from their jobs not feeling themselves, not feeling whole. And it's the hope that these will help a little bit. This list is longer than we can sustain. I understand that. There will be a survey that will be available to community members to put these in certain tiers, just like the city did. Do you consider some of these positions a tier 1 position, a tier 2, a tier 3? We'll take that feedback and along with the data, I'll analyze it and talk to more people, and we'll make a final recommendation of what can we afford over the 2 years, but also with the mindset of knowing that plan will then be refined down to trying to keep some of this long term. It can't be just a 2-year run and then we're done. There has to be some element of this that will stay with us long term. Thank you. Ms. Fraley.
My final request, I think speaks a little bit to maybe what Mr. Meyer raised, which is I actually am in support of this new model, to be clear. And I also want to make sure that we're hearing the feedback. And so I'm wondering if we can get whatever the final proposal is out earlier than the Thursday before, so that there's more time for people to review it and then send in comments to the public comment website. I don't know how much earlier it could happen. I know you're talking about the survey and everything. I want to make sure that we're all positioned to be able to ask additional questions after that proposal comes out, but before the meeting, so that again, when we come in and we're making a decision, we're not making it based on things that have been lifted up 15 minutes before. So that, again, this is millions of dollars. It's very exciting that we even have this kind of opportunity. I just want to make sure that the community feels heard, we feel prepared to make a good decision, et cetera. So I support the process. I also just want to make sure that we've got the time to look at the new proposal, process it, and come in and vote.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley. And I'll just reiterate, if folks want to weigh in, there's multiple sessions about the ESSER funds that are scheduled. I know Dr. Means is looking forward to hearing from you all. You can also go on to the website on the school board section. There's a form to fill out if you have additional questions about tonight and what that looks like as far as any of the things you heard tonight. And then of course, before we vote, there will be an opportunity for you to advocate for the position you want. And as always, you can email your board members directly, call them directly, whatever the case may be. So multiple opportunities for community engagement. Mr. Allen.
Thank you. I'm going to ask an annoying question, but I just feel like it has to be asked. So I know as part of the website, one of the toggles that got a lot of love, I guess, was we should do kind of a bonus for the staff to thank them for the hardship that they've been through and the lack of a compensation, like a lack of a raise over the past years. And we've talked about compensation and are we competitive, and that's not in here. So I just raised the question of if we're adding a number of positions, and then I think within the report we're saying that some of these positions are dependent on us being able to have increased state funding in the future, but obviously our ability to pay the staff that we have already an increased wage or increased salary is dependent on that, probably increase in state funding. Are we making it harder? And I just feel like I have to ask it. Are we making it harder for us actually to be able to provide a higher level of compensation for the staff that we already have? And I guess I think the answer to that is yes. So it's like, okay, we have to decide what's the right thing. Have we engaged the staff at all in a survey or just questions? I know in the past we would do a staff survey and it would say, if the district could support you, would you prefer higher compensation or would you prefer more support? I think those are the main two questions that were asked. And then depending on the answer, we decided, okay, maybe we should heavy up on support staff or we should provide more compensation. I don't know if we've done anything like that. I just worry that if we put all this in place, but then lose the staff we have we won or have we lost? That doesn't feel good.
So
I'm hopeful by March 14th, we will have a new compensation plan to present to the Board of Education. That new compensation plan, it has been, we're able to, and I don't want to, still, we need to finalize it.
Okay.
We've been collaborating with teacher leaders all year. But that dollar, we found dollars within the budget right now to finance it. Because compensation is so important. I don't want to associate it with ESSER, right? So I think there, at least for the short term, we're going to be able to finance it. I say the short term because we're all subject to what the legislature does or does not do for public education. But that has been, I guess, Sean, that is a set aside.
Okay.
That I shared with the board, I've shared with staff members, that is a priority. That is priority number one, fix the teacher compensation system. I'm very confident. I don't want to get too in honor of the Winter Olympics, I don't want to get too far out ahead of my skis on this one, but I think we've done some really good work and have made really good progress. And again, our goal is a month from tonight to present to the board a new system, a system that is totally different from the one that's in place right now. Where I think Mr. Meyer mentioned it earlier tonight, a system that teachers don't feel like they have the ability to question things. I'm pretty confident that people will embrace this new system.
Then it may make sense, just as any part of communications that we do on this, it may just be helpful context to say on a separate, parallel path, we are also talking, because we heard from people saying we want to compensate our staff to keep them here in Tulsa. There's a separate plan that's being done on that.
Yes, sir. I'm hopeful that tonight's message has been, in addition to some of the other challenges we've had this school year, we've been at work doing some other things too.
Thank you.
So that we'll get at it. Yes, sir.
Any other board comments related to the ESSER funds item? Seeing none, we'll move on to our final agenda item, which is public comment on non-agenda items. So anything you want to speak to about items that were not on the agenda tonight, please come forward. We'll start with those in the room. Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Deb Falk-Pellick, 7435 West Wells. Tonight, Dr. Mean spoke about people not feeling welcomed coming into the boardroom. And it is stunning to me to hear the change in the policy. And as Mr. Meyer brought up about open government, he's the only person that brought up that. And people are used to having agenda items with public comment. And for this to just not be communicated to the community, it's not right. And I'm shocked that there's only one board member who actually stood up for open government. It's concerning to me. I am concerned about with the LEAs or school districts must provide opportunities for stakeholders to meaningfully and substantively contribute to the ESSER 3 plan. And as I read through the plan, I saw the first item was talking about delayed advancement of learning for students identified as gifted and talented within the school district. I was fully expecting to turn the page and see a goal related to the same delay in advancement of learning for students with disabilities. No such page existed as I turned through all 39 of those. There's clear and present information from across the United States regarding just this. And the DPI, the Wisconsin DPI recognizes this as well, based on their requirements, which are very easy to find on the website and I've spoken about before. Where is the engagement with our families with disabilities? And this just, it must be done. It's required. The special education audit that hasn't been completed, that could help inform some of this ESSER plan. When we invited Dr. Means to our PTA council meeting, represented parents of every district school, he used the word antiquated to describe special education. certainly not the whole program. But I'd like to hear more of his ideas and see those put in here. Regarding the audit, I really would like the board to look at board policy 2421.01. And please let me know how that curriculum was looked at, because I don't see it in here. I also don't see anything about students taking the alternate assessments. You know, one of the terms that I heard in the 3 years that I was the district family engagement liaison in special ed was the term stuff off the internet. You know, where's the curriculum? And as I hear about these teachers, some of them having to just come up with this stuff on their own, I'm sorry, teachers, that you have been let down in this district by years and years of nobody paying attention to what is going on. I was stunned. I think all of us were stunned at the PTA council meeting when Dr. Means told us we're going to hear some really disturbing things. And certainly we did hear that tonight. So where in the curriculum audit were some of these things addressed?
We are at 3 minutes. If you could finish up, I think.
Thank you. And I encourage you to have open government. The word transparency continues to be used. This was not transparent tonight. The community was not informed that you were changing the protocol of how that was done. Thank you, Mr. Meyer, for standing up for open government. I wish the rest of you would have.
Emily Peters, 2525 North 82nd Street. Though I appreciate the presentation of the audit, as a parent sitting and listening to the results of the curriculum audit, I'm speechless. How did we get to a place where we have a curriculum without measures and accountability? I'm not excited by any means. I'm actually horrified. Many of you on this board have been sitting here for years, and it hasn't even come up that you would inquire on the goals and measures of the curriculum. I think the board owes the community answers as to why we are at this point with where the curriculum stands. And then I'm also very disappointed that there's nothing planned in the ESSER 3 funding for special education, as there is a requirement as 20% of a set aside for certain groups, and the special education department is not addressed at all. I think you're missing something very important. So that's it.
Joe McLeod from 772 North 116th Street. I want to address the highly inappropriate change in procedures that was conducted during tonight's meeting. Quite honest, it's completely out of order. I was at the meeting at which you referenced the in-service meeting in which you referenced, among other measures, to limit public comment because of your belief that public comment was disruptive to your meetings. You should be seeking public input and not limiting it. There is no authority given to the president to make unilateral decisions of such nature. At the very least, this decision to change procedures should have been brought up before the full board for a discussion and vote with public comment during that session. This is highly inappropriate. There was numerous people that wanted to make comments on the things that were brought up tonight. And yet you guys found ways or insisted, and strictly by the president himself, to cut that measures off. This is inappropriate. Mike Myers is completely right in this matter. This is inappropriate. And like other people said, I am shocked that the rest of the board members have not spoken up for the rights of the public. Do remember the public are the people that have elected you, and we will find ways to remove you if you decide that we are not worthy of being listened to.
Let's move to folks online. If there is anyone that would like to speak on non-agenda items.
BJ Emery, you're allowed to talk. Please state your name and your address.
Yes, this is BJ Ermance, ERMENC. I live at 2749 North 75th Street, and I am a member of the Wauwatosa Commission for Citizens with Disabilities. I agree with what has already been said. I would also like to point out that there are not several weeks for the public to have input on this, because according to the plan, it has to be submitted to the state on March 11th, and that is less than a month away. Also, I ask respectfully that there be a virtual session added. Right now, there are only 4 in-person sessions, and we have people not only on our committee, but also throughout the citizenry of Wauwatosa, as well as parents of young children and students with disabilities who cannot get to an in-person meeting. So especially, as has been said, when we are talking about this many millions of dollars, that we need to give a voice to those people who cannot come in person. I have more feedback, but that will be saved for the feedback sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah Sellers, please state your name and address.
Deborah Sellers, a teacher at Underwood Elementary. Address is N15 West 26510, Gulfview Lane, Pewaukee. I just would like to thank Mr. Rollin and Mr. Meyer for speaking up. It is concerning that we were not supposed to have any public comment on these items. Also, to Mr. Rollins' point, it would be appreciated if some bonuses would be considered for the last couple of years of not having salary increases. And I can truly say in my 33 years of teaching, it has been a trying and most difficult year that I've ever experienced. So it would be nice to see that reflected in some sort of salary compensation, as we were once quoted that we would see the most salary increase that we've ever seen, and that just never came to fruition. So thank you so much for all your time.
Jules, please state your name and your address.
My name is Julie Alexander. I'm at 7224 West State Street, Unit 1A in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, 53213. I am first stating that I really am in support of Mr. Meyer, because I was very upset about not having the ability to have public comment as part of this meeting. And I know there's an election coming up soon. So, I mean, I'm just letting you know that might be part of the things that I think about when I decide to vote on school board. In addition to that, I have some real concerns about the ESSER funding. Basically, I believe that it just seems like, as a person with a disability myself, it's like we're being handed a plan, and a lot of people with disabilities are just say, oh, that's all right, we're happy with that, whereas if you read the regulations, there should have been community sessions with civil rights agencies and other agencies and parents before the plan was actually put together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mary Jo Randall, please state your name and address.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 59th Street. Obviously, this change in format is unacceptable. We'll have to be talking about that as time goes on. But for tonight, are you telling me that the curriculum audit is going to be on the next agenda once again? Is that an action item requiring a vote, or was that a board presentation? If it's not on the next meeting's agenda, then you've shut out any public comment on that report. Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
All right. move on to a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Muehlfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes, we are adjourned.